Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 521. You guys should do this and that. Please rest assured, young Master Jun. This matter is in our hands now. We won't let our big sister miss out on things. The two huge beast kings patted on their chest and solemnly swore to help him. Big Bear hesitated for a moment. Then, he gathered his courage and said, "Since this old bear will give things a try after dinner tonight. I will find the big sister, and I will talk to her about her desires. The big sister is a woman at the end of the day. So, she won't open up to me. But, I reckon that my guidance will have some effect on her." It seemed that fourth brother bear is willing to go to any length for the sake of big sister's happiness. He's even daring to go out and find big sister so that he can talk to her about an ideal life. Earthcracker lowered his head and didn't speak anything. However, he was admiring Big Bear's courage. "That won't be appropriate." Jun Moxie quickly vetoed the idea. He thought to himself, "Your suggestion is neither in my favor nor a good one. Are you trying to toss me under the bus? My ass is still hurting. And you're already wishing to make things worse for me. Why won't this be appropriate? What's inappropriate about this?" Both the Beast Kings were stumped for words. Jun Moxie rolled his eyes and said, "Aren't you aware of your big sister's temperament? She's very cold towards this matter. I would have already done this if it were possible. Moreover, it won't be good if she figures out that you're also involved this." "What you're saying is..." Both the Beast Kings sighed at the same time. In fact, they felt slightly distressed in their hearts. Big sister's nature is such that it's useless to advise her. Moreover, she will go towards the opposite direction if people overdo it while trying to persuade her. Therefore, this method will only bring disaster if she figures out that we're trying to fix the situation. But you can do this if you genuinely wish to help me. You can spread this in public when you return to the Tianfa forest. Tell everyone that Mei Shuiyan has already married me. She won't have a way out after this happens. Then, pick a place in the Tianfa forest and pick a big place. I will build a palace there. And I will treat it as our brand new house. She will soon see my determination in this manner. After all, there's no way back once the timber has been turned into a boat. And I believe that Shuiyan will also start inclining towards me as time will pass. What do you think?" Jun Moxie slowly turned his eyes and said, "Amazing. That's indeed amazing. This is super amazing. Ah." Earthcracker clapped his hands with a bang. Big sister is mostly worried about how other people will react and make fun of this. However, this happens will be akin to the entire Tianfa forest showing their full support. And she will know this once this happens. After all, a matter once done can't be undone. Rice can't be returned to its raw form once it has been cooked. Besides, what would she have to fear once young Master Jun will have set up a palace there? Yes, that's exactly what I intend. Your elder sister and I will live in the Tianfa forest along with everyone else when the time comes. And none of us will ever be separated after that. Even my master will also be there. After all, the Tianfa forest has herbs in abundance. So, my master will certainly be very happy to live there." Jun Moxie beamed smiles as he said, "That's an excellent plan. This is indeed an excellent plan." The eyes of the two Beast Kings turned brighter. "But this matter must be kept confidential. And It must be carried out very secretly. You mustn't let your big sister know about it in advance. Jun Moxie lowered his voice and explained in a secretive tone. Nobody knows what will happen in case she learns about the plan in advance due to our negligence. Anyway, everyone is aware of your big sister's personality. That is true. Do you think we are idiots? Even Sister Green Hunter won't come to know about this. Big Bear glared at him. He then looked at his palm. And, slam, he patted on his chest and said, "You feel reassured since I will handle the work. Then, this is all I request of you." Jun Moxie profoundly thanked them in an elegant manner. "You're very polite. Very polite. All of us will become a family in the future. So, why are you being so polite? You can always tell us whatever you need, brother-in-law." Earthcracker returned the polite gesture in a flurry. In fact, he even blurted out brother-in-law in a very smooth manner. He had feared his big sister since his childhood days. Therefore, he felt that it would be good if he were able to curry a favor with his future brother-in-law in advance. "That's fine then. I will take this batch of herbs to my master so that he can see if we're still missing anything. We must quickly get to refining the pills. After all, that's the most important thing at present." Jun Moxie said this with a dignified expression. "That's right. Thank you very much. Everyone in our family back home is eagerly waiting for this. It would be amazing if you can get pill done by breakfast." Big Bear and Earthcracker were beaming with happiness, and were thanking him again and again. "Wait for a moment. I forgot about this. You will be staying in Tianxiang City for a few days. And you will obviously wish to have some fun, right? I've arranged lots of gold for you. So, go ahead and buy anything you like. And don't be formal. I have plenty of money here. In fact, I will feel very unhappy if you try to be formal with me." Jun Moxie brought out an enormous package with a crash and bang. This package was full layers and layers of gold and silver banknotes. Tang Yuan was famed to be the god of wealth in the capital city. However, young Master Jun was genuine god of wealth when it came down to it. This is indeed. How can we shamelessly accept this? The eyes of both beast kings were shining brightly at this moment. "I feel embarrassed by your words. After all, we're all a family. So, isn't my family the same as yours? Spend freely. There's no need for formalities. Also, don't forget to buy things for your brothers and sisters in the Tianfa forest as well. You can take something for them as you go back. After all, you've come here for the first time. So, it's my responsibility to take care of you." Jun Moxie pretended to be displeased. He then picked up the bundle of herbs and said, "I will go and deliver these herbs. You should have fun. You should go out and have fun." Then, he turned around and left. Earthcracker grabbed the bundle of gold and silver notes. His entire face seemed enchanted as he said, "He's truly a very generous. Our brother-in-law is truly a very good man." Big Bear felt the same the way deep down. So, he also nodded repeatedly with a serious expression on his face. He then said in a manner that made it seem as if he was taking an oath, "This relates to our elder sister's happiness. So, we must seize this opportunity. This will be the biggest wedding in our Tianfa forest. We must work hard for the sake of elder sister's lifelong happiness. We must put in great efforts to accomplish this." Earthcracker stopped swaying the banknotes like a fan. And his face slowly became firm and resolute. Then, he stood up and slowly nodded. He then solemnly said, "Fourth brother is right. We will handle this matter as soon as we get back. And we will do it to perfection." Both the beast kings looked at each other. Their appearance was different now, it was firm and determined. Waves of men and horses had been storming into Tianxiang City from every direction. Numerous horse-driven carriages had been galloping towards Tianxiang City. And each of these carriages was loaded with heavy weights. Tianxiang City had started to look like a mixture of fishes and dragons. The gold and silver Xian fighters were usually enough to intimidate the common people inside the Tianxiang City. In fact, they were regarded as experts. However, that notion had vanished in a puff of smoke. In fact, these so-called experts had suddenly become as well-behaved as ordinary civilians. The Earth Xian experts of the city would usually act extremely arrogantly. However, even they had started to lower their heads nowadays. The faces of most of them had started to seem like simple and honest men one was likely to meet in the street. In fact, they would speak very cautiously and gently. And that's because the nights were packed with the sky emitting rays of blue lights, light blue, azure blue light, deep blue light. And there are few people who wouldn't even produce a Xian light of any color. Moreover, these individuals would be shuttling back and forth in the city in numbers. The experts had swarmed in. And these 4 words genuinely carried solid weight this time. It was roughly estimated that the foreigners who had arrived in the Tianxiang City included at least 200 spirit Xian experts. Meanwhile, the number of Sky Xian experts had reached a frightening figure of 1,000 people or more. In fact, many great-level masters had also showed up. This was nearly the concentrated strength of half of the mainland. It was equivalent to the combined strength of at least a dozen high-end Xian families. Moreover, everyone had arrived with the same purpose, the bone-tempering pills. The publicity of the quality and effect of these bone-tempering pills had reached a frightening degree. And this had quickened the heartbeats of these influential families. After all, creating few young geniuses would be as easy as blowing off dust as long as their family possessed these pills. Moreover, the entire family would more or less be guaranteed to flourish forever if they could somehow store a few extra pills for the future. This was crazy. It was completely crazy. A group of 5 men slowly entered from the West City Gate at noon with their horses. All of them were dressed in black from head to toe. Their natural posture made them look like immortals. They silently got along with the city's crowd and entered the Tianxiang City. The only conspicuous thing was that they had a purplish golden belt tied around their waist. The people from the illusory ocean of blood entered from the East City Gate almost at the same time. The face of the illusory ocean of blood's young Lord Huyan Xiao turned abnormally serious as he walked into the Tianxiang City along with his subordinates. A group of high-caliber men walked in from the northern gate. They were wearing hemp garments instead of ones made out of silk. And the hats they wore on their heads seemed to be flashing with silvery radiance. In fact, these hats seemed like crowns at a glance. This obviously attracted the attention of everyone who was around. However, these people pretended as if there was no one around, and strolled into the city as if it were their front lawn. The auction of the bone-tempering pills was finally and formally inaugurated with Tang Yuan as the host. It could be said that the auction would be magnificent and unprecedented this time. Even the auction hall had been temporarily remodeled. In fact, it had been transformed in its entirety. Its front and back were expanded till it had gobbled up a few large houses in the vicinity. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for the venue to hold so many people. It was necessary to pay 100 gold coins in advance to participate in the auction. The participant would receive a special number plate after they had made the advance payment. And this would mark their eligibility to enter the auction house. This also showed Fatty Tang's business mind. This was a case of brazen robbery in broad daylight. In fact, it would have been fine if Fatty Tang had exquisitely handcrafted those number plates. However, they were nothing more than plain and ordinary number plates. They were only worth 1 or 2 silver coins. But he had demanded 100 gold coins. Moreover, one couldn't reclaim this money once they had entered the auction. However, which one of the people who had arrived to participate in this auction would care to pay 100 gold coins? Therefore, Fatty had conspired to collect wealth by this means. And he even got away with it. 100 gold coins wasn't something these people wouldn't raise an eyebrow over. After all, it was only intended as an entry fee. However, they would stand to lose a lot if they didn't pay it. Moreover, several hundreds of people had flocked in. So, why wouldn't Fatty make some profit out of this while grinning from ear to ear? This entry fee had alone generated a revenue worth 6 or 7,000 gold coins. And that was a fairly scary number. The Duanmu family and the Sikong family had arrived a few days in advance. And they were currently staying at the Jun family's residence. Sikong and Yi and Duanmu Chao Fan were obviously the two people to arrive from their respective families. The sun hadn't come out early in the morning. And the sky was rather cloudy. But the front of the aristocratic hall was already crowded. The auction was about to begin. And everybody wanted to see which family would blossom and which would fall. Jun Moxie had made an awe-inspiring entry in the aristocratic hall. After all, he was accompanied by 4 legendary beauties, Mei Shuayan, Guan Qinghan, Snake King, and Dugu Xiao Yi. Meanwhile, Big Bear and Earthcracker had been stationed with Hai Chen Feng and Song Shang in order to ensure the safety of their guests. Guan Qinghan hadn't wanted to come out, but Jun Moxie had pulled her out. But she obviously didn't come alone. Instead, she brought 2 more women to walk along with her. Everyone had stared at them as they had made their way to main hall. Even the people who were standing at a distance weren't an exception. In fact, this action had been pestilent in nature. However, it was surprising that there were no sounds of murmuring from the crows. And that's because the look on young Master Jun's face was that of a man looking for trouble. So, who would dare to utter a word? Who would want to start a lifelong enmity? Guan Qinghan had felt terrified at the beginning. However, her apprehensions and inner demons were gradually removed to a great extent as a result. Only Dugu Xiao Yi had followed at the back of the procession with a jealous face. This position was supposed to be mine, boo-hoo. In fact, it could be said that she had pouted her lips to an extent that one could hang a lantern on them. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 522. Experts gather. Ning Wu Qing. Fatty Tang was seated opposite to Jun Moxie. The fatty was wearing an extremely thin robe even on such a cold day. However, he was still wiping his sweat non-stop. The frenzy outside the hall resembled a momentous wave. And these waves of frenzied aura were even infiltrating into the hall through the walls. Fatty's mental strength was rather weak. Therefore, it was impossible for him to withstand the aura of this place since the world's strongest people had gathered here. Third young master. You're going to stay here for this auction, right? Tang Yuan said with difficulty while wiping his sweat. Jun Moxie looked at Fatty's cowardly appearance and felt somewhat helpless as a result. You look like you've got diarrhea. You think I won't stay here for this auction? Feck. You're worthless. This is such good opportunity for you to seek fame. And you look like you're about to let it slip by. Don't tell me that I will have to take charge in person. Fatty calmed down to some extent. He then looked at his sweat-soaked robes and said with a bitter smile, "Third young master, I can barely scrape by this task today. I would surely lose weight if we hold more of such auctions." Debauchee sneered at this. This little girl was sitting next to Mei Shuiyan. Consequently, she couldn't sense this pressure since she was well protected. Therefore, she obviously didn't look as miserable as Fatty Tang. Guan Qinghan and Mei Shuiyan also couldn't help but smile at the sight of this. Fatty's appearance could lighten up anyone's mood no matter how gloomy they had felt. It was indeed very comical. Okay, this young master will personally take charge of things. I will heroically go out, and I will control them in a commendable manner. Jun Moxie snorted. He then smiled with the attitude of an upright and unafraid hero. Debauchee suddenly addressed in a contemptuous tone. You are the host of this auction. So, it's obvious that you'll have to control it. What good would you be if you can't even control it? This is how it should be. But, you're still feeling so complacent about something so obvious. Everyone burst into laughter. Mei Shuiyan smiled and said, "You need to pay attention. This auction must be a low-key affair. Moreover, you ought to be aware of when you're supposed to stop. The people who've arrived here are very powerful. This makes me presume that people from the three holy lands will also show up. In fact, I can sense the aura of a few old acquaintances of mine. This isn't the time for you to make money. You must be clear about this point. There will be big trouble if you provoke this crowd's anger. In fact, so many powers have gathered in Tianxiang City right now that even I won't have any other option besides withdrawing in case they were join hands against you." Jun Moxie smiled as he nodded repeatedly. This is a bit extreme. However, he had other plans in his mind. Don't make money? Then, what are we doing in this grand auction? Are we here to give them the pills as gifts? I'd rather feed these pills to the pigs. The aristocratic hall's gate was slowly opened as the sun started to rise in the sky. Two individuals appeared at the doorway. They were smiling wholeheartedly. 16 youngsters dressed in white clothes had been arranged in 2 rows at the entrance. They were stationed there to welcome the guests. The auction is about to begin. Please show your number plates to enter. The caliber of people who had come for the auction seemed very high this time. The aristocratic hall's gate wasn't opened in advance. But it must be said that no one had seemed impatient, nor was anyone making a ruckus. It can't be said that there was absolute silence outside the gate. But it was peaceful nonetheless. The gates had been opened at this time, but the guests had still remained silent. In fact, nobody had budged. Instead, everyone was waiting calmly and quietly. A massive burst of momentum showed up. Then, a cold breeze started to blow. The crowd in the front of the aristocratic hall started to separate, and a big strip of road was left vacant as a result. 5 people in the black robes showed up. They then slowly walked to the front amidst the lowered murmurs of the crowd. The old man heading the group was dressed entirely in black robes. In fact, it appeared as if his robes had been dipped in black ink. He had a purplish-golden belt around his waist. A purplish-golden scabbard was suspended around his waist via a purplish-golden cloth. His facial features were lean and simple. And he was walking over step by step. He was being accompanied by 4 people. And they were also dressed similarly. But the differences could be clearly seen if one were to look at them attentively. One side of this old man's purplish golden belt was inlaid with 3 shiny and sparkling stars. His eyes were twinkling like that of a demon as was walking. 2 of his 4 companions had 2 stars inlaid on their belts, while the other 2 had only 1 star. It is worth mentioning that the 2 two-starred men were the Hurricane and Rainstorm Masters. The 2 earth-shaking swordsmen Hurricane and Rainstorm Great Master. However, the attitude of these 2 men had made it evident that the old man in the black robes held a higher status than them. The old man was walking in a manner that made it seem as if he was floating. He was covered with black robes from head to toe. However, his robes weren't swaying as he was walking. Also, his robes weren't wrinkling in the process. He slowly raised his eyebrows as he arrived below the stairs. Then, he gently opened his eyes and smiled faintly. However, it seemed as if his eyes had contained the summation of the worldly vicissitudes. Hai Chen Fong was the in charge of welcoming the guests. However, he suddenly felt as if everything had gone dark before his eyes. Even his soul felt as if he was looking at the starry sky when he looked at this old man's eyes. He was left spellbound for a moment. But he then calmed himself and managed to come back to himself with some effort. Then, he looked at the old man again. But he felt normal this time. In fact, it seemed as if nothing weird had happened. He then heard the old man saying, "This old man is Ning Qing from the elusive world of immortals. I've arrived to participate in the auction." He handed over the number plate once he was done speaking. He had acted in complete accordance with the aristocratic hall's rules of entry. Hai Chen Fong had never heard this name, but he had understood that this old man's was a remarkable individual. In fact, he had realized that this old man might be even stronger than his own master Meng Hongchen. However, he calmly accepted the number plate and cupped his hands in greeting as he said, "Senior, please come in." Then, a white-robed youngster came from behind and led these 5 black-robed men into the hall. Upstairs of the aristocratic hall, Mei Shuayan sighed and said, "This man is a 3-star law enforcer from the elusive world of immortals Ning Qing." She then lightly spat on the ground and said, "He's devoid of any virtues and morals. He's merciless and ruthless." Jun Moxie's eyes shone as he remarked, "Well, his name suits him in that case." Mei Shuayan whispered, "This man was originally a scholar named Ning Dunru. He was a stunning talent of literary arts. However, a young master from some influential Xian family of his hometown dishonored his girlfriend one day." Ning Dunru shouted to the heavens, but got no reply. He called out to Mother Earth, but received no response. Moreover, that beautiful woman committed suicide by hanging herself via the ceiling. His temperament suddenly underwent a huge change after that. And he changed his name to Ning Qing. He abandoned his scholarly ways and picked up martial arts instead. He practiced swords for 15 years. And he returned to his hometown once his sword practice was successful. There were over 700 people in that Xian family which had sinned against him. And he killed all of them in one go. In fact, not even the mice inside that household were able to escape him. The power of his sword remained invincible for 90 years to come. He would roam the lands and would punish any evil he would see before his eyes. In fact, he would incapacitate an individual even if he were to see them stealing something as insignificant as a chicken or a fowl. He was very fierce and would go to extremes to do this task. He remained a bachelor his entire life. He remained a solitary man. He joined the elusive world of immortals later on. But who would have imagined that he would become a 3-star law enforcer? After all, This means that he's considered an outstanding personality even inside the elusive world of immortals. He used to kill out of pain. Jun Moxie's eyes shone. He praised this old man. Dugu Xiaoyi had been amazed by Ning Wuqing's aggressive attitude. Guan Qinghan somewhat sympathized with Ning Wuqing's bitter experiences, while the Snake King envied Ning Wuqing's Xian strength. Only young Master Jun had blurted out a sentence. Ning Wuqing had walked into the hall the moment Jun Moxie had said, "Kill out of pain." Consequently, Ning Wuqing raised his face and glanced upstairs. His glance seemingly spanned through the time and space like a lightning in the dark. It then seemingly turned into a sword and stabbed Jun Moxie's face even though they were separated by a few walls. And Jun Moxie genuinely felt a sting on his face. His vision had obviously not been malicious, but it had been enough to demonstrate his strength. After all, Jun Moxie had felt the touch of this stare even though he possessed the cultivation of near a Sky Xian peak expert. In fact, prominent signs of warning had arisen from Jun Moxie's heart. The people from the elusive world of immortals took their seats. Moreover, they had taken their seats in the first arrangement of the first row. The 5 of them had sat down at the same time and hadn't even said a word. An individual would feel that the hall was empty at this time in case they were to try and sense with their eyes closed. And that's because these 5 people had seemingly fused with the atmosphere. The Snake King muttered, "That's 2 great masters. And 3 individuals who are above the great master level. Big sister, when did the elusive world of immortals become so strong?" Everyone had obviously understood the meaning behind Green Hunter's question. This was only an auction. 5 individuals had arrived to participate from the elusive world of immortals. And all of them were super experts. So, what was the real background of this elusive world of immortals? This makes it seem that the elusive world of immortals must be very intimidating. In fact, the elusive world of immortals must be stronger than us by a fair margin. Mei Shuiyan's expression seemed somewhat heavy as she sighed. And, mainly because we Xian beasts have to cross the most difficult bottlenecks for breakthrough, she said while looking at Jun Moxie. And there was an ardent hint of hope and expectation in her eyes. Jun Moxie smiled mischievously and said, "Everything will be easy to handle as long as you agree to marry me." "Get lost," the 4 women retorted in unison. "In your dreams." Jun Moxie shrunk his head back. 5 people dressed in hemp robes walked inside with expressionless faces after the people from the elusive world of immortals. Their heads were crowned with hats. They were being led by a man whose body was extremely thin. But he was still wearing very spacious hemp robes over his body. In fact, he looked like a hemp pole. He seemed neither too young nor too old. So, it was hard to judge his age. His face looked like an eggplant which had been stirred in the food blender for a long time before being left out to dry in the air for a year. In fact, his face made it seem as if he had experienced the vicissitudes of several thousand reincarnations. The dressing style of these 5 individuals was very similar to the people from the elusive world of immortals in a way. And one couldn't make out which one of them was superior or inferior in terms of status. Only a careful observer would discover that there were 3 golden lines on the inside of their leader's hemp collar. An even more careful observation would make one realize that those 3 lines were the images of 3 golden swords in reality. However, the other people had only 2 golden swords on their collars. This hempole-like looking man came in front of Hai Chen-feng and said in a low voice, "Great Golden City's Ma Jiangming has arrived from a visit." Hai Chen-feng didn't dare to neglect this man. He collected the number plate and said, Please come in. This man is Ma Jiangming. He's a top-ranking expert of the Great Golden City. He looks funny, but he's extremely dreadful in reality. Mei Shuayan was introducing these men since she knew that Jun Moxie won't be able to recognize them. Ma Jiangming. Like a lucky charm of sorts. This is a very good name. Jun Moxie couldn't help but laugh. He then said, "But this guy also looks extremely unfortunate, doesn't he?" He looked at Tang Yuan, touched his chin, and said, "Brother Tang's body can be divided into 20 Ma Jiangmings at the bare minimum." This contrast is a bit too obvious. Tang Yuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, everyone else burst into a loud laughter. His father was a gambler. And that's why that man had given his son this name. So, this was intentional. Mei Shuayan smiled faintly and said, "But what you've said isn't wrong either. This man's nickname used to be Face Full of Vicissitudes in those days. But you mustn't get fooled by his looks. And that's because there are merciless daggers hidden in his smiles. This Ma Jiangming and Ning Qing are personalities of the same era." Big sister. Why was he called Face Full of Vicissitudes? Debauchee had unwittingly started calling Mei Shuayan as Big Sister since Snake King was doing so. Because his face has appeared full of vicissitudes since the day of his birth. Mei Shuayan couldn't help but smile as she said, "In fact, he looked like an old man who had seen many vicissitudes even when he came out of the womb." Everyone roared with laughter together. However, this man's life was extremely rough. He lost his parents when he was young. And he was obviously incapable of earning his livelihood at that time. So, he sold himself to a brothel and became boy servant there. He started to serve as a hawker in the brothel when he grew up a little. In fact, he used to peddle various kinds of aphrodisiac to the customers. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 523. Tit for tat. Measure for measure. Mei Shuayan had realized that it might be improper continue talking on this subject. However, she still carried on with a tranquil expression on her face. Ma Jiangming's appearance was certainly strange. But what he did for a living was even more unique and distinct. He used to scream, "The golden gun won't fall," every day. In fact, he had to yell these words till his throat went hoarse with it. He himself considers this as a disgrace from his past. However, some people would mention these words in front of him once he became famous. He disliked those who uttered these words on his face. After all, he considered it as a provocation. Anyway, wouldn't he die from rage if he considered it as normal? Therefore, he would use his strength to kill such people. Big sister. You. Guan Qing Han and Green Hunter flushed with anger. In fact, they could barely hide their displeasure at this. However, Dugu Xiao opened with her big and round eyes and asked with curiosity, "The golden gun won't fall? What does that mean? Wasn't he talking about some wondrous medicine that would help men in standing tall and upright? Why didn't he like his old job? What's the real story?" Mei Shuayan tried to force a smile, but couldn't. She suddenly gave a blow on Dugu Xiaoyi's nose and spoke. "Oh God! You're such a tiny girl. You might be able to understand the real meaning if you stop talking for a while. You must not tell this to an outsider, but, the medicines which he used to sell had the same effect as that hang 100 pounds you had once mentioned." Dugu Xiao immediately began to blush from ear to ear. After all, the tiny girl had seen the effect of the hang 100 pounds medicine. Moreover, She had also learnt a little about the affairs between men and women after the fiasco she had brought about. However, she was lucky since everyone present in the immediate vicinity was a friend. She flushed with embarrassment as a result. But she was unable to restrain herself from looking at Jun Moxie. The little girl had believed herself to be secretive. However, everyone had noticed this little action of hers. And they couldn't help but laugh. However, there existed another person apart from debauchee who had shot a secretive glance at Jun Moxie. It was Miss Guan Qinghan. She had observed that Jun Moxie had looked towards her with a savoring the aftertaste look in his eyes as soon as he had heard these words. Wouldn't it be obvious as to what he was thinking about? He had certainly made an effort to stay calm, but he hadn't been able to prevent his face from heating up. In fact, his cheeks had unexpectedly turned a shade of vermilion. However, Ma Jiangming happened to meet a person in the brothel one day. Coincidentally, this man was an extremely unusual individual as well. However, an even more bizarre incident took place as soon as that man looked at Ma Jiangming. That man recognized Ma Jiangming to be an extremely talented individual with amazing innate skill in only one glance. And he decided to accept Ma Jiangming as his disciple in that very moment. Soon after, Ma Jiangming began to follow his teacher. And his teacher had extremely high hopes for him. However, the disciple came through on his teacher's expectations and made a name for himself across the continent. Ma Jiangming and Ning Qing gradually grew in strength and joined the ranks of the other great masters of their era. And they soon reached the peak levels of strength. Later on, Ning Qing went to the elusive land of immortals, and Ma Jiangming went to the great golden city. But who could have thought that we would have seen him here? Then, Mei Shuayan slowly spoke to warn everyone. In fact, there was a faint trace of caution in the depths of her pupils. This Ma Jiangming is an extremely temperamental person. He has different moods at different times, and none of his moods are in accordance with morality or logic. He might be good and tolerable towards others at 1 hour, but he might kill anyone in the next hour. In fact, he would do that without giving any warning signs. Moreover, he often murders people who have nothing to do with him. He only relies on his own likes and dislikes. Therefore, it is better that you maintain a decent distance from him. He often moves his hands to kill people in an instant. Take me seriously. Even I won't be able to save you from him in time. Doesn't this man's appearance tell something about a sinister plot at play? Jun Moxie asked abruptly. Why do you say so? Mei Shuayan gave him a strange look. His master was a customer at a brothel. In fact, he was a committed customer. His master must have been a great expert of his era. However, he had still found it important to visit a brothel. Don't these aspects hint at a sinister cultivation method at play? Jun Moxie continued in a matter-of-fact tone. Also, Ma Jiangming was helping his then-master in running a brothel at that time. Therefore, that man might have liked Ma Jiangming since he would have presumed that the latter might have possessed this innate skill as well. It would be wrong to take this for granted. It's indeed true that this Ma Jiangming has had a bad reputation in the past. He had done nearly all kinds of malicious acts in the past. In fact, it would be no exaggeration to say that there's no evil act he hasn't done. However, this man doesn't seem to have committed that sinful practice of cultivation. And that's because, firstly, he has never borne affectionate feelings towards anyone, nor has he had any entanglements of love. Secondly, he has never married a woman. Mei Shuayan shook her head and overruled Jun Moxie's theory. However, his argument had still pushed her into deep thoughts. She tried to get to the bottom of the matter. How did it come about? After all, this can't be possible without any reason. Did the man receive Ma Jiangming as a disciple because they were practicing sinister methods of cultivation? Is that the justification for it? There must be a reason for it. Jun Moxie pondered over it. Suddenly, a grotesque smile appeared on his face. In fact, it looked extremely vulgar. It seemed that he had allowed his thoughts to run wild. What are you smiling at? What are you thinking about? The baffled Mei Shuayan asked abruptly. All the women turned to look at Jun Moxie in unison. I was just thinking about what you told me. You said that his master used to practice a strange technique. However, it is possible that his master wasn't able to see much success for some reason. And that might have pushed him into changing his ways to do the exact opposite. And that man must have turned in the reverse direction for his cultivation as a result. Jun Moxie spoke with a sinister smile on his face. It is possible that Ma Jiangming possesses some special characteristics. And these special characteristics might be considered as defects by others. But there's a chance that these characteristics fulfill the unique requirements of his master's unique cultivation method. And this might have made Ma Jiangming a rare kind of an individual in his master's eyes. How else can we explain this strange behavior? Jun Moxie had suddenly and unfathomably recollected an extremely famous yet strange martial arts from his previous life, the precious sunflower technique. He had spoken this out loud because of this sudden recollection. However, even Jun Moxie hadn't realized that he had stumbled across a huge fact with this whimsy thought. I will have to be doubly careful in case I happen to cross paths with him someday. Jun Moxie secretly thought to himself. Where does that kind of a technique exist? How could Ma Jiangming be that lucky even if such a technique did exist? This is a completely bizarre thought. It's only a part of your crazy imagination. Guan Qinghan, Dugu Xiao Yi, and Snake King looked at him as they rebuked. Their faces had turned red. However, Mei Shuayan didn't act out like the other three nagging women. Instead, she wrinkled her eyebrows. In fact, it seemed as if she was thinking over something. Ma Jiangming had already arrived in the hall below. He then exclaimed with a strange smile on his face, Ning Wuqing. You're also here? Long time no see. A cold smile floated on Ning Wuqing's lean face as he replied with an insipid look. Look who came from the great golden city, it's this old freak. I'm old, but not dead like a thief should be. Ning Wuqing. It's not a bad idea if you desire to call me an old freak. After all, you're also an old freak. You're no younger than me. So, we're in the same boat. Ma Jiangming's sharp voice made it seem like he was cracking a joke. Yet his tone was still sorrowful. His voice left everyone to tremble. A freak like you rarely agrees with anyone. But you've done opposite of what's expected. I'm indeed not much older than you are. Ning Wuqing brushed his sleeve as he slowly started to take his seat again. Oh. So you mean to say that you can live longer than me? Ma Jiangming said with an uncanny smile. Then, his voice became extremely gloomy. Ah. Great. We two old bachelors have come together at this time. So, why don't we see who can live longer? Your head already looks like that of a dead man. Ma Jiangming, do you still wish to fight with me? Ning Wuqing's complexion turned grave. His words had a sharp undertone of berating. Ma Jiangming's utterance of the word bachelor had touched upon Ning Wuqing's past. He had even induced the sharpness of his hundreds-of-year-old cultivation into his voice. Ning Wuqing's body unsheathed itself like a divinely sharp sword. Ning Wuqing was still motionless, but the entire hall had permeated with sword energy. In fact, it seemed as if this sword energy would cut the hall and smashed it to pieces. The entire hall was suddenly filled with an air of enmity. It seemed that everyone was jittery enough to set into action at the slightest sign of a movement. Why wouldn't I fight with you? But this place may not be a proper arena for us to fight in. Ma Jiangming snorted and said, Ning Wuqing, we are destined to have a battle. I can totally assert this. Ha ha ha. Ma Jiangming, you're such a shameless boaster. You managed to escape this old man's sword 136 years ago by a fluke. You might not have the same luck this time as well. Ning Wuqing gave out a long smile as a look of disdain appeared in his eyes. Official positions change in every 3 years so that we can take note of an individual's hard work. Even locations change every 30 years. So, what do you think can happen in 136 years? Ning Wuqing. Those who think too highly of themselves often start celebrating before it's time. Ma Jiangming replied in a sharp tone. It is vital for you to not lose the fame you've earned over the last 200 years at my hands. I will wait and see. That's because I look forward to that day when I shall behead you with my own hands. Ning Wuqing snorted. It seemed as if these two people hadn't gotten along with each other in the past either. In fact, it was evident that they had even fought a battle of near life and death. Moreover, it seemed obvious that Ma Jiangming had lost in that fight. Upstairs, Mei Suyan and Jun Moxie shared a quick glance. Both of them shared the same thoughts. Mei Shuyan was slightly worried, but Jun Moxie seemed eager to see that fight. Mei Shuyan was worried because the battle for seizing the heavens was imminent. The three holy lands are still busy fighting against each other. An inner strife is a terrible wastage of resources. This is the worst possible thing. However, young Master Jun was extremely excited. That Huang Taiyang had certainly possessed a very profound cultivation. However, he had been even more arrogant than an apex expert like Mei Shuyan. In fact, his attitude was nearly suffocating. However, Ma Jiangming and Ning Wuqing possessed the demeanor of true peak experts. Moreover, the aura of Ning Wuqing's swordsmanship had given a familiar vibe to Jun Moxie. In fact, he felt as if his technique was somewhat similar to kendo from his previous life. He felt that these men would be regarded as apex experts even if they were to be viewed from the standards of his previous life. He had determined that he would fight against one of them. Jun Moxie lowered his eyebrows and closed his eyes half shut. But his mind was overflowing with thoughts of a fight. He felt that he would learn a lot if he got an opportunity to fight against one of them. However, today wasn't about these two old masters. So, Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming didn't continue to nag at each other. Instead, they swallowed their anger and sat down. However, the two of them had barely taken their seats when the third wave of high-level individuals arrived. This group was headed by a middle-aged man who appeared to be around 40 years of age. He was dressed in a purple robe. And his robe was lined with golden embroidery. He could have been considered as an extremely talented person if he weren't looking this gloomy. These new arrivals were the illusory ocean of Blood's people. Young Lord Huyan Xiao had arrived with the remaining great masters in tow. Huang Taiyang hadn't yet returned. Therefore, Huyan Zhao's team only included 5 people in total. And this was when he was included in that count. However, Huang Taiyang was dead. So, the illusory ocean of Blood's team were somewhat lacking. And That meant that their mannerism was also less imposing than the two other holy lands at this time. Consequently, Huyan Xiao crossed Ma Jiangming and Ning Wu Qing with the etiquette of a man from a younger generation. He then took his seat in the third row of arrangements. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 524. This divine pills effect can contend against the heavens' creation. Soon after, it was the turn of the people from the mainland's influential families to enter the auction hall. The younger generations of these influential families would usually act very arrogant. But all of them seemed very cautious and solemn on this day. And one thing was common among each of these influential families: their leader was old enough to have snowy white hair and beard. One look would make it obvious that they were the ancestors of their respective families. These old ancestors naturally possessed profound Xian strength. However, each of them also had a second characteristic. And this characteristic was the most important one: they possessed extensive knowledge and experience. This auction was extremely important. After all, it could affect the future of the society. In fact, it could even alter it. However, these families would also have to face extremely serious consequences in case they ended up offending people who shouldn't be offended. Therefore, it was necessary that these knowledgeable and experienced old men lead their families for the course of this auction. Let's take the matter of entering the auction hall as an example. The younger generations would have hastily charged into the hall the moment it was opened if they had come alone. But the youngsters would never do something this silly and sinful, since their ancestors were leading their party to the auction. Could the people from these worldly families move into the hall if the delegates from the three holy lands were still waiting outside? Wouldn't that be akin to courting death? Moreover, these people would first go over to the seats of the three holy lands delegates once they'd enter. They would then pay their respects. And they would look for their own seats only after they had done this. Everything seemed synchronized in a perfect order, and there was no confusion whatsoever. In fact, it seemed as if these aspects had been properly arranged in advance. These acts of courtesy had nearly wasted half of the morning. And this had left Jun Moxie to yawn again and again in his seating area upstairs. In fact, the young master felt very dull. After all, he felt that he would have been better off refining more pills during this time. The door of the hall was slowly closed shut once everyone had entered the hall. And the hall suddenly sank into darkness as a result. Even the windows of this large hall had been closed shut. Every individual present on this scene was a top-ranking expert. Therefore, they weren't worried about the possibilities of any mishaps. However, they were left somewhat bewildered by this. Suddenly, a big flame was ignited on a high altitude at the center of the hall. And countless sparkling objects glittered up in every nook and corner of the hall as the light of this flame reflected onto the hall below. These lights flashed and merged. And the entire hall was suddenly illuminated by their dazzling lights as a result. The fact is that Jun Moxie had ingeniously used the principle of optical reflection for this. And he had successfully created a dreamlike environment inside the hall by using one regiment of flame and countless gems. The entire hall had brightened up. However, the true delicateness of these preparations was visible from the fact that there was no smoke or fire-like odor in the hall. Who amongst those present in this hall wasn't knowledgeable and experienced? However, they had never seen such a strange and marvelous scene. They were left astonished to the extent of clicking their tongues. This scene itself has made our trip worthwhile. This aristocratic hall is an eccentric marvel. It deserves its reputation. Suddenly, a loud, tapping sound came from the auction stage. Then, A youngster dressed in white clothes appeared on the stage. He had a faint smile on his face and a gavel in his hand. He had slammed that gavel a moment ago in order to attract everyone's attention towards the stage. Each of our guests is a senior and a hero. And everyone has surely arrived here with the same purpose in mind. Therefore, I won't start with some nonsense speech and waste everybody's time. After all, I'm aware that our guest's time is very precious. And this youngster's upright nature wouldn't be able to endure angering his seniors, haha. Jun Moxie looked at the experts in the audience and decided to start things off with a little joke. After all, he wanted the mood to be lively. However, he hadn't expected that no one would cater to it. The scene had remained awfully silent. In fact, it could be reckoned that one would be able to identify the source of a sound as light as a gentle cough. This instance had come out as that rarity where the young master had ended up appearing less suitable than usual. In fact, it seemed as if the young master had been given a cold shoulder on the stage. Is this crowd made of statues? However, one survey of this hall was enough to tell that even the weakest amongst this crowd belonged to the Sky Xian realm. It was needless to talk about the Spirit Xian level either. After all, they could be found in abundance over here. Moreover, there were almost 2,000 or 3,000 people gathered in this place. Jun Moxie was certainly extremely daring, but even he couldn't dare to act rashly and provoke a public outrage under these circumstances. Therefore, young Master Jun coughed twice while he secretly thought, "All of you are so untactful. This young master will twist his own neck if he doesn't make you people bleed money. You think you're experts? Ba asterisk ls. I won't be called the evil monarch if I don't swindle you out of your money until you start bleeding from your nose. I hereby announce that the special auction of the bone-tempering pills has officially started." Jun Moxie was still smiling wholeheartedly. He then proceeded to say, "This bone-tempering pill is a kind of supplement pill which is rarely found. And it is far more effective than what the legends mention. There could be the so-called notion of all talk no action in some people's minds. Some might even say that these pills won't be as extraordinary and impactful as promised. Therefore, I will first take out 3 pills in order to reassure everyone. And I'd like to invite one individual from each of the 3 holy lands to test these pills and examine if its effects are the same as those advertised so arrogantly by the sellers. Would everyone be convinced of the effects of these pills in case the seniors from the 3 holy lands were to test them out?" Jun Moxie had spoken a rather shady sentence. After all, he was still somewhat resentful that the crowd hadn't responded to him. Therefore, he had decided to use this trick. "Well, maintaining your silence in response to this question will imply that you don't believe in the 3 holy lands. And who could afford the consequences of that?" There was a sudden surge of excitement as soon as Jun Moxie's voice faded. In fact, the wave of that energy nearly broke through the hall's ceiling. "I will be convinced. In fact, there would be nothing to be unconvinced about. After all, the 3 holy lands have always been the objects of our admiration. Haha. Why wouldn't we be convinced if the people from the 3 holy lands were to personally verify the quality of these pills? In fact, that would be the ultimate proof." "That's true." Jun Moxie laughed on the inside. "You couldn't maintain your silence anymore. Ha! Feck that. How could this young master have given vent to all that gloominess if he hadn't made you people roar your throats hoarse?" However, there was no change in his facial expressions. Then, 3 youngsters dressed in white clothes walked onto the stage. Each of them held a small tray with 1 bean-sized bone-tempering pill on it. They then carried these trays to the tables of the 3 holy lands in a very respectful manner. Ning Wuqing glanced at Jun Moxie with an abstruse look in his eyes. However, Jun Moxie remained calm and collected as he smiled and nodded in response. Ning Wuqing contemplated for some time. He then picked up the tiny yellow pill. Then, he twirled the pill in his fingers, but he was still not convinced about it. Is this tiny pill genuinely capable of transforming the inborn skeletal framework of the human body? However, he indifferently raised his hand and swallowed the pill. It must be mentioned that his Xian strength had already reached a level where he needn't be afraid of even the most highly poisonous substances. After all, he could easily dispel any kind of poison from his body once he had discovered it. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of any mischief Jun Moxie might have tried to cause. I reckon that nobody would dare to play tricks on the three holy lands. Coincidentally, Ma Jiangming and Huyan Xiao had also thought along the same lines. Therefore, they too swallowed the pill after some hesitation. Thereupon, the faces of these three men lost their color. High-caliber individuals like them had obviously experienced many mishaps over their long lives. Could they have stood firm and unyielding in the face of those earth-shaking experiences if it weren't their forte to remain calm in the face of enormous misfortunes? The pills melted in their mouths the moment they were ingested. Only a balmy fragrance was left to linger. A large amount of force was produced as this happened. Then, this force got distributed into countless small stands and entered the meridians of their entire body in a split. After that, they felt a sudden itch in every joint of their body. This sensation was also accompanied by a subtle pain which had seemingly arisen from the deepest corners of their hearts. In fact, it seemed as if their very souls had been sent contorting. The three men resisted the pain and looked at each other with cold eyes. However, they saw no change in the expressions of their counterpart. It was obvious that none of these three men was prepared to lose their face in front of all the heroes of the mainland. These three men possessed profound Xian strength. Moreover, their physique had transcended the superhuman level by a far margin. Therefore, the pain they were feeling wasn't that intense. However, any other individual would have started crying out in pain by now if the said individual were to be substituted in their place. However, this was the pain of undergoing a thorough transformation of the body. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming were able to remain resolute and steady under the public gaze. Their expressions had also remained unchanged. Even their eyes hadn't shown any fluctuations. However, Huyan Xiao was weaker in terms of strength. Tiny beads of sweat had already appeared on his face. His expressions had made it evident that he was trying to resist the pain. In fact, his eyebrows had started to wrinkle. A while passed. Suddenly, the bodies of these three people issued bursts of sounds. Moreover, these sounds were similar to those which are heard when something breaks. In fact, it seemed as if every joint in their body had gotten ruptured. Everyone could imagine that these three men were suffering from enormous pain at this moment. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming forcibly suppressed their desire to resist this pain with the help of their Xian strengths. Instead, they concentrated themselves on observing the interiors of their bodies. And they were pleasantly surprised to see that their bones were undergoing some minor transformation around the crucial joining points. These two men had been engaged in the endless battles over the years of their lives. And their bones had already been molded to their finalized state long ago. In fact, their bones had begun to age. However, every bruise on their bones had suddenly started to disappear at this time. Moreover, their muscles and tendons were being pulled apart and readjusted to the most ideal location. Both of them had a subtle feeling that their bodies had recovered to the point where it could be considered that of a newborn's. The pain they were feeling was very difficult to tolerate, but it was genuinely worth it. In fact, both of them felt that they would be willing to endure hundredfold pain in order to attain such a result. They wouldn't have hesitated to choose this pain. The powerful effect of the bone-tempering pill continued to work on their bodies. But the two of them no longer had the slightest of doubts regarding the marvelous capabilities of the bone-tempering pills. Both of them simultaneously looked towards Jun Moxie on the stage. They then exposed traces of divinity in their eyes. In fact, their gaze even contained traces of heartfelt gratitude. After all, these two men wouldn't have gotten to experience the effects of these pills if Jun Moxie hadn't asked them to test them out. And that's because these bone-tempering pills would have been given to those talented youngsters once these two men had won them over in the auction. After all, those youngsters were being cultivated to become the future powerhouses of their respective factions. Firstly, these two men would have considered it beneath their dignity to fight over these pills. Secondly, they were very old. Therefore, they wouldn't have won even if they had fought over them. However, they had never expected that they would get to consume one of these pills right after laying their eyes on them. Both of them were super experts. So, how could they not know what impact a minor correction in their joints would have on their strengths? In fact, the situation of their transformed body would be entirely different from the time when they hadn't consumed these pills. They could upgrade every aspect of their cultivation again, whether it was their speed or strength. In fact, the available scope of improvement was fairly astonishing. However, Huyen Xiao wasn't thinking along the same lines as these two old men. His strength is relatively lower. And he had also realized that this was a good thing for him. But this pill's process of exerting its potency was very painful. He had employed his entire body's strength to resist the pain. In fact, he had barely prevented himself from exposing unsightly expressions in front of everyone. However, his body and clothes were already wet with sweat. And everyone present on the scene had discerning eyesight. So, how could they have not noticed that he was in a distressed state? However, nobody had dared to express it out loud. This experiment had by and large reached its end by now. Ning Wuqing's face exposed a trace of satisfaction as he sensed his brand new body. Then, he took a step forward, looked at Jun Moxie, and spoke up in a dignified tone. "Thank you." Jun Moxie smiled faintly and replied, "Don't mention it." Ning Wuqing chuckled. He then turned towards the audience and spoke up in an unhurried manner. "This Ning Wuqing confirms that this bone-tempering pill is very effective. Moreover, its effect goes beyond the expected. This bone-tempering pill deserves to be called a magical pill. In fact, this magical pill is wondrous enough to contend against the heavens' creations." Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 525. The Terrifying Ratio. Meanwhile, Ma Jiangming and Huyen Xiao also expressed the same views and acknowledged the efficacy of the bone-tempering pill. Everyone present in the hall brightened up within a moment. Then, everyone started whispering. It wouldn't have mattered if one or two people had started to whisper. But the whispering of thousands of people had started to resemble the sound that is made by thousands of snakes as they crawl across thick underbrush on a heavy rainy day. In fact, the Snake King even stretched her neck to look down at the hall. "It's unlikely that my beast race is holding a meeting downstairs, right?" The entire hall had spiraled into chaos for a moment. After all, the people from the three holy lands had verified the pill's efficacy. The importance of this pill had increased many folds in the eyes of everyone present. And their attitude had changed from, "I want this," to, "I'll pay any price to have this," in a split second. Silence. Everyone, please calm down. Jun Moxie had learned a judge's mannerism on the TV. Tap tap, he slammed the gavel twice with a serious expression on his face. However, his mind was very calm. Meanwhile, Mei Shuayan and Green Hunter focused their attention on the people from the three holy lands. Whereas, Guan Qinghan and Dugu Xiaoyi prepared blank papers, pen, and ink. They seemed ready to take notes. Jun Moxie had initially conducted this auction in order to make huge amount of gold for himself. He had planned on using this financial power to acquire the resources he'd require for his troops. He had also intended to manufacture divine weapons for them by using this money. He had harbored a second objective as well. And that was that he wanted to prepare for the future. After all, Jun Moxie wanted to build himself a palace in the Tianfa forest. And that would act as his base of operations in the future. However, these things could only be regarded as a fantasy unless he had a massive amount of gold at his disposal. However, he had started to harbor more objectives than the two mentioned above. This auction of the bone tempering pill was related to the future outlook of every influential family. So, it would clearly show which families harbored grudges against each other, and which family were good friends. It would also reveal which families could be exploited, and which family ought to be forsaken to the point of breaking all contacts. After all, this was undoubtedly very valuable intelligence. Moreover, there was another very important purpose, Mei Shuayan's objective. The beautiful Mei wanted to know the current status of the relationship between the three holy lands. These three factions hadn't showed up before people at the same time in a long while. Therefore, no one knew how the relationship between the three factions was at present. What were their secret whereabouts? What aspects had changed? Could things go back to the way they used to be? They were fighting amongst themselves. But, could they reunite in the crucial moments when they were faced with foreign invaders? Could they still work as one? After all, this intelligence pertained to the future of the entire continent. These planning of these aspects couldn't be ignored. Therefore, Jun Moxie was genuinely looking forward to this auction. The bone tempering pills were top-grade miracle medicines in these people's eyes. So, they wouldn't hesitate to spend tens of thousands of gold coins in order to get hold of this amazing thing. It must be said that Jun Moxie didn't consider these bone tempering pills as staple goods. However, he didn't consider them to a rarity either. In fact, young Master Jun wouldn't have refined so many of these pills if they weren't capable of amassing massive amounts of wealth in an auction. The hall was hosting nearly half of the continent's elite figures at this moment. These people had traveled for thousands of miles to arrive here. They had nearly exhausted the entirety of their family's properties to raise money in order to buy this product. These people wouldn't hesitate to fight do-or-die battles over this item. They would even vie over it till they had gone bankrupt. However, they could have never expected that this item wasn't worth much in the eyes of another. This was probably the great irony of the situation. And Jun Moxie deliberately didn't announce any specific rules for the auction because of the reasons mentioned above. In fact, he didn't even frame rules such as no malicious competition, no deliberate hiking of prices, or no usage of private means to threaten someone, etc. The efficacy of this magical pill has already been proven. Therefore, the auction begins. Jun Moxie slammed the gavel on the table. And the entire hall fell in silence as soon as the gavel was slammed. The auction house will put up a total of 50 bottles of bone tempering pills. Every bottle has 20 pills in it. In other words, any family will be able to cultivate 20 of its members to have boundless future prospects as long as they are able to purchase this pill in this auction. The family would be ensured that the Xian cultivation of these pills consumers will progress faster than their counterparts. They will go farther than their peers. And their achievements will obviously be greater as well. Let's take an analogy to explain this. Let's assume that a certain genius is born in a family. And this said genius possessed the ability to reach the spirit Xian level in 60 years from the day of his birth. Then, this individual would be able to achieve the same result in 40 years if he were to take a bone-tempering pill in his childhood itself. And this compression of time could even become shorter in some cases. This means that there will be a minimum gap of 20 years when compared with someone who hasn't taken the pill. And I'm sure that everybody must realize what this gap represents. Jun Moxie's bewitching words struck the floor of the hall in a manner that the already stifling atmosphere became even more serious. Everyone's face turned heavy as a result. And it was obvious that they had started thinking about the true meaning behind Jun Moxie's words. What does this gap of 2 decades mean? It means that we would still be struggling with the Jade Xian level, while our peers would be busy breaking into the Sky Xian realm. Almost everyone was left to shudder at this thought. Aren't you saying that a family which has these bone-tempering pills would find it super easy in the near future to eliminate a family which doesn't? Training 20 great experts in a single stroke. Ah! Everyone's eyes had reddened. Only the 3 Holy Lands people were an exception. There are only 50 bottles of these pills. And it can be predicted that each person from the 3 Holy Lands will take at least 1 set of pills, maybe more. However, the influential families present here count to 600 in number. In fact, there's more than 600. More than 600 families will have to compete for less than 40 sets of pills. This is a very cruel ratio. Third young Master Jun. There are only 50 sets of bone-tempering pills in this auction. Isn't that too less? Someone was bound to raise an objection. And the person who stood up to take the initiative was an extraordinary gray-haired old man. He stood up from the middle rows of arranges and said, "There are over 600 families present here. And you've only put up 50 sets of pills for the auction. This is extremely unfair for most of the families." He had spoken in a very loud voice. And everyone had responded almost instantly. It was obvious that everyone was thinking of rising against the idea. After all, these bone-tempering pills were an unworldly treasure. So, who wouldn't wish to procure them? Who wouldn't want their family to stand proudly at the top of the continent? Who would want everyone in the mainland to look up to their family? Who wouldn't desire to order about the society? Obey the orders of no one. Overlook the lands like an emperor. Silence. Jun Moxie struck the table once again. "Old man, may I ask your surname?" The old man who had taken the initiative to stand up and raise the objection was slightly stunned by this. "This man is Xiao Ban Feng. I'm the elder of the Feng city's Xiao family." It is true that this old man's question had stemmed out of his selfishness. But my viewpoint was also directed towards the public's interest. However, I didn't mean to disrespect the Jun family or the aristocratic hall. And there was no maliciousness intended behind my action. However, I request the third young Master Jun to reflect upon this. Xiao Banfeng's words had sounded very decent. In fact, they had been appropriate for the situation. However, it had still managed to showcase his position very clearly. In fact, this old man would have broken into a cold sweat in case the tone of his voice had been remotely excessive. After all, the Jun family and the aristocratic hall weren't the kind of forces a worldly family could provoke. He had managed to stand out at this juncture. Therefore, it wouldn't be good for him in case he ended up provoking the aristocratic hall's resentment over this. To be honest, it was fairly plausible that young Master Jun's forces would disrupt the proceedings in the name of maintaining order in case Jun Moxie flared up in the moment. Consequently, this old man would be driven out of the venue. And it could be reckoned that no one would intercede. After all, one entire family would be driven out of the competition for the pills in that case. And this action would bring about a dead loss for this man. However, young Master Jun faintly smiled and said, "Mr. Zhao needn't worry. The aristocratic hall is a place of rationality. And it will never offend its guests for no reason." The elderly gentleman had raised the problem of lack of pills a moment ago. And that had caused a lot of confusion. However, I have another question that I'd like to ask the elderly gentleman. I hope the gentleman will give me the answer. Yes. Of course. Third young Master Jun. Please ask. Zhao Banfeng said. May I dare to ask the elderly gentleman if he has ever taken anything similar to these bone-tempering pills? Jun Moxie asked. How could anyone have had the chance of taking something like this pill? No. I haven't taken anything similar. In fact, I haven't even heard of anything like this before. This is a legendary medicinal supplement. And there can be no mistake about this since the supreme experts of the three holy lands have personally verified it. In fact, there would have been slight doubts in this old man's senile mind if that hadn't happened, Zhao Banfeng said. Has the elderly gentleman ever heard of anyone who can refine this kind of a pill? Jun Moxie asked. Never. How could something divine enough to challenge the heavens' creation be seen around so casually? Zhao Banfeng replied. That implies that this item is so rare that it's akin to seeking something godly in this world. But wouldn't this item become staple food if an ordinary man's hands to create? And aren't such men considered a joke? Young Master Jun gently smiled and said, Everyone please note that this aristocratic hall is doing an auction here. This is not a place to buy and sell randomly. Most of the precious items present here have only one copy. But there are still hundreds of families which compete for it. Does anybody have a problem with that? Is this very usual? Therefore, the price is obviously high as well. This is the basic rule of the auction. You can only look at other people buying the stuff if you don't have enough money. After all, that would only mean that your strength isn't enough. And it would obviously be justified if other people were to exterminate your entire family later. Don't tell me that we still need to argue upon this. This was followed by a spell of sudden silence. That's right. This is the basic rule of any auction. Can you hope to buy something good if you don't have any money? Let's not even speak about other things. This auction house could have made a much bigger profit if it had put these pills on show before holding this auction. However, this hall has dedicated itself to the business of conducting auctions. And I'm even one step further when it comes to it. In fact, we've divided these pills into 50 batches since we took our guests' limited purchasing power into account. Then, Jun Moxie rolled his eyes and said, However, I can conduct this auction as a one-off item sale if everyone is dissatisfied. Okay? So, there will only be one batch of pill in that case. And whoever bids the highest price can take it. And you will certainly agree to this if you have the strength to win the bid. Does everyone agree to this? Jun Moxie had said this to provoke the thousands of men who were seated below the stage. After all, which one of them would admit that they didn't have the required strength? Consequently, everyone opened their mouths to speak up. This is an auction house, not a charity hall. How can these divine pills be given out to everyone like that? What is this logic? Zhao family elder, You can leave in silence if your family can't afford the pills. After all, you wouldn't have been worried about this if you had the power to buy it. Haha. That's true. Why have you come here dressed like a big shot if you don't have the money? This arrogant guy isn't even afraid of showing off so much. This is amazing. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 526. Unstoppable like wildfire. There was a huge hullabaloo of voices. Old man Zhao Banfang's lips quivered out of anger as he looked at everyone with an expression of resentment. But he was astonished to discover that many of the ones who were jeering at him at this time had incited him to speak up in the first place. Did these people fucking put me out on the grill? They've been my friend for so many years. He couldn't help getting angry as he retaliated. His lips trembled and he spoke. You. Very well. The Zhao family may not be regarded as an immensely influential family, but we have the money to buy their pills. We can afford them. So, let's see who wins. It was obvious that the people who had mocked him were against the Zhao family. Perhaps there was some feud between their families. And every family had noticed this point at this time. Mei Shuayan quickly swept her glance around the hall below. She then said, "Record the first set of notes. The Zhao family has old grievances with the Ma family, the Wu family, and the Jiang family. Moreover, the Sun family and the Qian family don't like them much either. So, it will be easy to instigate them against each other. We'll sort this data accordingly once we go back. We'll make different lists for families that will help us, and families that can be instigated into helping in case there's a matter." Guan Qinghan's pen moved at a flying speed as she accurately recorded the first information from the auction in a clear handwriting. Jun Moxie settled down at the auction stage. He was watching these families and their reactions with the detached look of a bystander. He was convinced that his speech had enticed the right passion and enthusiasm for this auction. After all, he had successfully created a lively atmosphere at the auction. And he had also built up the image of, "Stay silent if you don't have the money to make a bid." The young master had managed to salvage this situation. And he had also set a great environment for making big profits. Moreover, the importance of these pills had suddenly shot up to a point where they had become a matter of life and death for these influential families. And all of it was the evil monarch's strategy. It was obvious that not everyone would take this very seriously at first. But that didn't matter. After all, it would be enough for him as long as everyone had started to harbor a trace of fear and suspicion. In fact, the young master wasn't even expecting to fully convince everyone present. It must be kept in mind that even the men who don't intend to harm someone aren't without thoughts of self-preservation. Therefore, it had now become important for these families to fight over these bone-tempering pills, even if these pills were only meant for self-protection. After all, who could guarantee that the later generations of their families would walk the lands unhindered, and wouldn't have any enemies? That would be nonsensical talk. Jun Moxie decided to strike while the iron was hot, and threw out the first piece of bone. The first round of auction will begin now. There are 20 capsules of bone-tempering pills in the first set. The base price is 100,000 in gold. Jun Moxie spoke up loudly. "I invite the senior representatives of every family to begin with the bidding. The price is high, but the deal is fair and equitable. Our auction house offers sincere treatments and fair deals. This is a good bargain. The one who starts early doesn't have to worry about missing out on it. So, getting it early can only be considered as smooth sailing. Let's have a good beginning to the auction. Let's see who captures the first batch." Young Master Jun's speech had basically sounded similar to the words a roadside hawker uses to market his goods. Suddenly, there was pin-drop silence across the entire hall. All eyes were gazing at the first row. They were waiting to see what approach of the people from the three holy lands would take. This basically meant, we'll rush into making our bids if these people start aggressively. Ning Qing was about to speak up with a faint smile on his face. However, that is when he heard a sad-sounding voice. The great golden city bids 100,000 in gold. Does anyone wish to fight over it? Jun Moxie's nose instantly crooked in anger. Bah! What is this dog shut? Is this downright robbery? The base price is 100,000. And you merely started the first bid at 100,000. In fact, you even added, does anyone wish to fight over it? Your behavior is utterly shameless. It's a good thing that I only put up one batch of pills for you. Everyone's face was revealing that they hadn't expected this from him. But no one uttered a word. Jun Moxie remained silent for a long time. However, he eventually had no choice but to speak up. The great golden city bids 100,000 gold. Would anyone like to increase the price? Is there no increase in the price? 100,000 goes once. 100,000 goes twice. 100,000 goes thrice. Hold on. Ning Qing's face looked heavy. He lifted his gaze and spoke up in a deep voice. The elusive land of immortals bids 100,001. He had only added one gold coin. This was undoubtedly a loud slap on the great golden city's face. And, especially to Ma Jiangming's face. After all, he had disdainfully asked if anyone wishes to fight over it a moment ago. It would have been a fair match if someone had bid right after he had made this declaration. However, Ning Qing had waited till the last moment. Then, he had cut into Ma Jiangming's deal. What did this imply? Moreover, he had only increased the price by one gold coin. It would have been a reasonable and legitimate bid in case he had increased price by a margin. However, the addition of only one gold coin had clearly indicated his intention of humiliating his rival. There was a big clamor from the audience. After all, nobody had expected that such a strange situation would arise in the opening round of the auction. Mei Shuiyan sighed softly as she looked on from upstairs. Her face flushed with an intense color of anxiety as she said, "Note that the enmity between the elusive land of immortals and the great golden city has reached a point of incompatibility. In fact, they are almost like fire and water. And choosing between these two factions should be treated as a decision of importance. One would need to be extremely cautious, and mustn't think blindly while picking one and rejecting the other." Debauchee complied, and her pen ran off to record this incident at the speed of a dragon. Jun Moxie wanted his most trusted individuals at hand when it came to task of recording and sorting out such top-secret information. Jun Xie and Jun Wu were obviously the most trustworthy. But it wasn't appropriate for them to show their faces in the public under the present circumstances. Debauchee and the others were hidden from view since they were seated upstairs. However, the people present in the lobby were strong enough to distinguish their presence. Perhaps Mei Shuiyan was the only one who could conceal her presence from these guests below. In fact, Ma Jiangming and Ning Qing's monitoring abilities were so strong that even the Snake King couldn't hide a single one of her actions from them. Ma Jiangming's complexion transformed. He then snorted. "Ning Qing, do you genuinely wish to play like this?" Ning Qing laughed out loud at first. Then, he replied in a cold but solemn voice. This old man didn't find this very pleasing to his eyes. The base price is 100,000 in gold. And you started your bid at such low price itself. Moreover, you even threatened others. Is this how you would have wanted to open your auction to business if you had been in their place? Ma Jiangming, this was your mistake to begin with. How can you dare to call yourself a senior expert from the three holy lands with such behavior? You may be able to carry yourself in this manner, but this old man can't afford to lose his face like this. Ma Jiangming snorted and said, "The great golden city bids 300,000 in gold if that's the case. Ning Wuqing, do you still have any arguments over it?" The look on Ning Wuqing's face changed as he asked, "Ma Jiangming, are you trying to incite me?" Ma Jiangming didn't answer. He only looked at Ning Wuqing instead. Ning Wuqing smiled coldly and said, "You've consciously made an addition to the bid. And you've made it 300,000 in gold by doing so. This can be considered as a decent price. So, this old man doesn't feel like making things tougher for you." This is how the first batch of pills was successfully auctioned. Moreover, its price had suddenly risen to 300,000 in gold due to Ning Wuqing's enticement. And this could be considered a good beginning. After all, the Great Golden City was one of the three holy lands. And they had stamped the pills for 300,000. So, wouldn't the other families be looking down on the Great Golden City's assessment if they were to open their bids at a lower price? Therefore, almost everyone took a breath of cold air after this incident. The second and the third round of bidding didn't face any objection either. And they were won over by the elusive land of immortals and the illusory ocean of blood respectively. Moreover, both sides had bid at 300,000 in gold. However, Ning Wuqing had shot a glaring look at Ma Jiangming when he had announced this expensive bid. The reason was obvious. Ma Jiangming's intention behind bidding at 300,000 gold was, "I won't leave you feeling better about this if you make things difficult for me." However, Huyan Xiao had shown a tranquil and relaxed expression on his face when he had made the bid. In fact, it had seemed as if he had thrown away 30 pieces of broken silver coins. Obviously, there existed a reason for it. This money had come at the Huang family's cost. Young Lord Huyan Xiao had taken over the Huang family's estates and business after he had ascertained that Huang Taiyang had died. Then, he had sold these estates of the Huang family. He had looted their family's treasury as well. In fact, he had even mortgaged their family's residence. However, both parties involved in every transaction had helplessness written over their faces. The seller was obviously feeling forced. And the buyer hadn't necessarily agreed to do the deal. But the middleman Huyan Xiao would surely feel as pleasant as a punch while stuffing the entire revenue in his purse. Huyan Xiao was obviously very skilled in conducting such business transaction. And that was because he didn't care about the mindset of the buyers or the seller. The first round of auctions had come to an end. And each of the three holy lands had handed over the gold in order to collect their pills. However, the unique requirements of the auction had given rise to the need for a very efficient calculation system. After all, huge amounts of gold and silver coins would change hands during this auction. However, young Master Jun had already made arrangements for the same. And who could be better than Fatty when it came to accomplishing this task? The gold coins had piled up like a mountain. However, Jun Moxie had merely sent 8 assistants along with Fatty. Moreover, he had also given a warning: all the gold must be counted. None of it should be left. Tang Yuan, your share will be reduced by 10% even if there's 1 coin less. I want all of it counted. Tang Yuan had arranged a massive pot full of pig trotters in order to replenish his strength whenever needed. However, he still wasn't very optimistic that the pot would be sufficient in the current situation. After all, only the first round of the auction had ended thus far. However, 1/3 of the pot's contents had vanished into his stomach. But Fatty still hadn't figured the inside story of this strange situation. It turned out that this entire pay in coins instead of banknotes was a strange trick that Jun Moxie had come up with in order to help in reducing Fatty Tang's weight. Fatty Tang would have certainly cried himself tearless if he had to find out about this. And that's because Jun Moxie would have straightaway told him to finish the entire task by himself in that case. And that would have been akin to smashing one's own foot with the stone they had previously lifted. However, it could be estimated that processing such a massive amount of gold coins would reduce Fatty's weight by a considerable margin. The fourth batch of pills was about to be put up. Therefore, everyone was sitting up straight with their ears erected. The real competition was about to start as far as these families were concerned. After all, the 3 Holy Lands were unlikely to interfere in these subsequent rounds. The fourth batch also has 20 pills. The base price is still 100,000 in gold. Moreover, each subsequent raise in the bid has to be by a margin of at least 10,000 in gold. Jun Moxie had barely finished with his opening remarks when someone made a bid for the pills. The Wei family of Jiangdong bids 350,000 in gold. This was uttered by a middle-aged man. Ning Wuqing and Huyan Xiao turned their heads. Then, they frowned. However, Ma Jiangming's face remained expressionless. This Wei family's first bid might not have been an attempt to buy the pills. Instead, this was probably an act to flatter Ma Jiangming. Moreover, they had done this in the presence of the other 2 Holy Lands. Upstairs, Mei Shuayan instructed in a heavy voice. The Wei family from Jiangdong can be considered a hardcore supporter of the Great Golden City after today's incident. They won't be able to change their sides after this, not even if they wanted to. So, you can write this down as confirmed. Guan Qinghan complied and began writing down the words Jiangdong's Wei family on a white paper. Then, she added a few more words at the end: subordinates of the Great Golden City. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 527. Disputes. Suddenly, a loud and clear voice was heard. Sikong family bids 500,000. Jun Moxie found this voice to be familiar. It turned out that the bidder was an old acquaintance of his Sikong Yi. He was head of the Sikong family. Sikong Yi flashed a faint smile when he saw that Jun Moxie looking over. This man had been arranged by Jun Moxie before the start of the event to act a phony customer. He was supposed to lure the real customers into spending more money. It was obvious that these phony customers weren't of much use in the present situation. However, Sikong Yi still hadn't held back. Moreover, he had suddenly shot up the bid's price to 500,000 in gold from 350,000. That guy named Wei irritably looked over. Hey, little man Sikong. Do you even have so much gold with you? Don't raise the price on purpose. Sikong Yi snorted and replied, Mr. Jiangdong's Wei, shut your mouth if you don't have the money. Jun Moxie realized that these 2 families also harbored hatred against each other as soon as he heard this. Upstairs, Mei Shuayan had already told Zhang Qinghan to record this. She had also asked for the Sikong family to be marked separately. After all, the Sikong family was considered as a faithful ally to the Jun family. So, how can they not pay more attention to them? Downstairs, a lot of people had begun to bid. Therefore, the competition had leveled up. The Eagle City's Guan family bids at 520,000 in gold. Southwestern Lu family bids at 530,000 in gold. Northeastern Xianyu family bids at 600,000 in gold. The people from the Sikong and Wei families sat down as the other families started to fall over each other in excitement in order to make their bids. However, the majority of the influential families were sitting contented. After all, this was only the fourth of the 50 batches. So, there was no need to hurry. But, it must be said that the faster one would get their hands on these pills, the more relieved they'd feel. Jun Moxie was continuously hopping about the stage while splattering his saliva in excitement. He was cunningly adding oil and vinegar to the fire from the stage. He obviously wanted to transform this spectacle into a massive and unstoppable wildfire. Is there any further increase in the price? Is there any? The price is at 600,000 in gold now. 600,000 in gold, goes once. Oh. There are friends who are holding up the bidder's sign. They appear financially stronger. Good. He bids at 650,000 in gold as expected. 650,000 goes once. Right over there. That brother bids at 680,000. 680,000. These bone-tempering pills are in a refined form. The herbs which were used to refine these pills are rarely ever found in this world. You might never be able to find these pills if you miss this chance right now. Over there. The friend bids at 700,000. Everyone should understand that gold is a trivial thing. What importance does it hold in comparison to the future of our families? It may be hard to pay such amounts of money today, but this hardship will ensure the fall of your enemy in future. And that will ensure the success of your family. Over there, a friend, what? Wow! 800,000. 800,000 goes once. 800,000. This amount is quite surprising. But it's worth it when one wants the family to prosper for 1,000 years. What is 800,000 for something like that? Jun Moxie had splattered all of it out in one go. But the price didn't rise any further once it had climbed up to 800,000. After all, it was about 800,000 in gold. Not just any 800,000 clods of land. It was an extremely terrifying figure. Jun Moxie called out the digits 5 or 6 times. Eventually, he was forced to drop the gavel with slight despair in his heart. 800,000 goes twice. 800,000 goes thrice. It is a deal. Only for 800,000. These rare divine pills can entirely transform a Xian practitioner's body. But these pills are being sold at such a small price. Bah! There's no justice in this world. Such an amount is given out to old men so that they can buy walking sticks. I would have set these pills at a much higher price if I had known this earlier. Great young Master Jun Moxie was feeling very apprehensive. And he kept muttering these words endlessly. He had reached a deal a moment ago, but it was evident that he wasn't satisfied with it. However, every other family had been rendered speechless. The deal had concluded at 800,000. It was sky-high price. It was sky-high through and through. It was neither about 800,000 in silver, nor was it about copper coins. The price was 800,000 in gold. Most of these families were long-standing influential families. So, they could come up with this kind of money if needed. Even the Huang family had managed to do so. But spending such amounts of money would still hurt them. However, it must be said that the other families would merely suffer some hardships, while the Huang family had been ruined. Who would have agreed to spend 800,000 in gold for only 20 pills if it wasn't about the future and safety of their family? After all, each pill was worth 40,000 in gold. Everyone's scalp had exploded in the face of such a calculation. The winner of this round of auction was an old man. He had seemingly sad-looking facial features. This old man's hair were as white as silver. His gaze was sharp, and his face looked somewhat gloomy. But one could trace happiness at the corners of his face. But he's the head of the Gongsun family. That's Gongsun Ju Dao. Someone softly called out the name of this old man who had put up 800,000 in exchange for 20 pills. Everyone had become apprehensive. It turned out to be this man. This old man is famous for his farsightedness. But it seems that these rumors are wrong. After all, he has spent such a huge sum of money only for 20 pills. But he still thinks that this is a blessing. What can be considered as stupid if not this act? People often don't meet up to their reputation when you meet them in person. It certainly feels better to meet a reputed man in person than merely hearing his name. I had once heard some news a long time ago. People had said that the head of the Gongsun family is extremely farsighted. He's known for his courage and ability to thinking into the future. He has carried forward his family's name with his own hands. In fact, it took him only 30 years to promote his family's name to the top level from that of a third-rate force. He's genuinely worthy of his name. And he'd very far-sighted. Note that Gongsun family's Gongsun Ju Dao is far-sighted and courageous. He possessed first-class thinking. And he's worthy of making friends with. Mei Shuayan commented. Dugu Xiao wrote all this down at a flying speed. Jun Moxie was still unfinished on the stage. So he came forward with the 5th batch of pills and began shouting on the top of his voice. Everybody! Everybody! The past is already over. Everyone has arrived here to create future glory for their family. And the chance is right in front of you. What are you waiting for? You will be the hero of your family if you return home with these 20 pills. And your contributions won't go unnoticed when your family emerges stronger tomorrow. Your grandsons will admire you for 1,000 years. They will cherish your memories. Let's come back to the main topic here. These bone-tempering pills are rare. They're an unprecedented medicine with an immense potential. So, there is a huge margin for the appreciation in their value. You might have to spend some money to buy these things today. But you will have a tenfold profit in the future. However, the price of this 5th batch is still at the same level right now. I now implore the 8 immortals to cross the ocean and show their talents. Let's see whose family blossoms and whose family falls. Jun Moxie had been too careless to realize that the old legend of the 8 immortals didn't exist in this world. In fact, he had completely overlooked this. However, no one in the audience cared about this. After all, they were only concerned about the merits of the pill. Could they care about legends and potential appreciation of these pills' value? After all, these pills could help their family in nurturing super experts in the future. Losing even a single one of them could be considered a sin. So, how could they pay attention to things like mythological references? Or even the resale value of these pills? Instead, they were busy in holding their placards as high as they could. The atmosphere of the hall had heated to unprecedented levels within moments. Many of these people could have never imagined that the price of these pills was extremely less right now. They would have to purchase these pills at a much different price later on. After all, only a few of these pills would survive many years down the lane. And those surviving pills would be sold at a freakishly high price at that time. In fact, each of these pills would come to cost around 3 million in gold in the future. And They would have to resign themselves to pay such prices at that time. Young Master Jun had ensured everyone that these pills would see a massive appreciation in value. And he hadn't joked about this either. After all, this was a fact. However, this was a fact that would follow up in the future. The fourth batch was sold out at 800,000. However, no one had expected that this sale price would turn out to be the lowest one. In fact, the prices had continued to increase dramatically afterwards. Even the second lowest had notched 850,000 in gold. The atmosphere of the hall had grown increasingly intense after the fifth batch of the pills was sold. Upstairs, Guan Qinghan and Dugu Xiaoyi had been noting down the comments, analyses, and judgments made by Mei Shuayan. They had already jotted down a thick pile of specific information. The objective of their research was gradually getting clearer. And the differences and disputes among all families were slowly rising to the surface. Snake King also looked like a secretary who was working under her boss Mei Shuayan. She was handling the tasks of classification, summarizing, distinguishing, arranging, etc. She had even made labels to identity and differentiate the categories. She was obviously doing this so that the specific information could be dug out as and when needed. These bone-tempering pills had already gained much recognition. After all, every family was concerned about their future. So, all of them wanted to attain the magical powers of these pills. In fact, a family would purposefully raise the price of these pills in case their rivaling family was competing for it. They wanted to hurt their enemies by increasing the prices in case they couldn't get it themselves. After all, they wanted to beat the enemy by any means possible. The heated atmosphere of the auction hall had slowly led everyone to indulge in a furious competition. Neither the old nor the young had been spared. Nearly everyone was red-eyed. They were hurling abuses at each other from the corners of their mouths. Some people had even come to the verge of breaking into a fight then and there. The auction hall would have easily turned into a slaughterhouse in no time if the three Holy Lands people hadn't been present to keep a watch. No one was willing to leave the hall. Everyone wanted to know which families would get to own these pills. After all, these families would become the center of everyone's attention in the future. So, the spectators wanted to note down the names of these families as well as their most talented youngsters. And that's because they would have to keep a close eye on these people later on. After all, these people could become their allies in the future, or maybe even their murderers. And who could dare to relax and ignore the precautions under such circumstances? Consequently, the number of people present in the hall hadn't gone down. Instead, the atmosphere inside the hall had started to soar to even higher degrees. The auction proceeded in this manner until it was lunchtime. It must be mentioned that the rules of this auction were rather simple. However, they had still managed to auction out only 12 batches until lunchtime. Such a speed could be compared to that of a snail. Nevertheless, people were enjoying their time as they stood in a circle to watch the bustling scene. Everyone was using harsh words towards their opposition. They were threatening, and even unmasking each other. The auction hall had come to resemble a microcosm for the entire continent, and all the grievances of the continent had concentrated in this microcosm. However, the two women Dugu Xiaoyi and Guan Qinghan were completely exhausted. It was a huge task to arrange these valuable pieces of information. In fact, both the women were somewhat envious of Tang Yuan at this time. That guy only has to move the gold. It's such an easy job. Unlike the task of writing down everything these 500 or 600 people are saying. Arranging and summarizing all this information is a work that requires brains. It could be said that these two girls would have collapsed if Mei Shuai-yan hadn't taken the responsibility of summarizing the information. Moreover, this was a task which came with massive mental pressure. After all, this data would determine the direction the Jun family would take in the future. So, even a small mistake made at this time could push the family into assuming an enemy as a friend in the future. And who could afford the consequences of something like that? It was winter at this time. However, the clothes of these two women had soaked in their sweat to a point where they had seemingly become transparent. However, Mei Shuai-yan's unparalleled beautiful face had been becoming increasingly anxious with the passage of time. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 528. Astronomical Numbers. A single glance was enough to determine that these few thousand people in the hall below possessed a great amount of strength when combined together. In fact, these people could even surpass the three holy lands in their power as long as they could work together. Individuals at the levels of Great Master level and above were surely very tyrannical and resistant. But they too were mortals at the end of the day. Therefore, they were also susceptible to exhaustion. And this meant that even such individuals could be killed once they had been rendered physically powerless. The three holy lands certainly possessed insane firepower. However, these families could take on even the strongest of them in case they were to come together and cooperate with sincerity. However, their relationships with each other were very complicated. And this had given Venerable Mei a horrible headache. After all, very few people are capable of letting go of such grievances and grudges. It could be said that a majority of these families were stuck deep in a swamp of grudges. And it was next to impossible to pull them out of it. Some of these people are carrying forward grudges from incidents that had happened 100 years ago. Shouldn't someone have come up and said, "Hang on, this is only an auction. Let's not grind each other over such an insignificant affair." Don't they ever get tired? Some of them are holding on to grievances that are 400 or 500 years old. Dang it. Even the people who had started these fights have turned to dust by now. But these people are still arguing over nonsensical things. Mei Shuai-yan was unable to comprehend this. However, these fights were also a source of abundant valuable information. And that's why the anxious Mei Shuai-yan was also urging Guan Qinghan and Dugu Xiao-yi to speed up the work. Guan Qinghan and Dugu Xiao-yi had been rendered speechless and confused. Their wrists were tired, and their fingers had gone numb long ago. However, they would be able to get back to work as long as Mei Shuai-yan would provide them with her primal qi. And that's because her primal qi would heal their physical exhaustion. But Mei Shuai-yan couldn't do anything about the mental exhaustion. These Dugu and Guan girls were prideful women who possessed an extremely high social ranking. The elder members of their family had always loved and pampered them. However, they had been confronted with certain special characteristics of Mei Shuai-yan's at this moment, such as Mei Shuai-yan was ordering these two women in an arrogant and bossy manner. Moreover, her entire body was emitting such a tyrannical attitude that these two women weren't able to refute her commands in any way. Therefore, they had been left with no option but to submit to her. And Dugu Xiao-yi and Guan Qinghan had been struck dumb by this. It must be mentioned that the two women were accustomed to being around men of character and authority. They had even met the emperor of the Tianxiang Empire a few times. They had also met countless ministers of the empire. Even the bold and powerful people such as Dugu Zongheng and Dugu Wudi were a common sight for them. And they were no strangers to brave and battle-worn generals such as Jun Zhantian and Jun Wuyi. However, even such men had never been able to put these two women under such pressure. How is this feeble woman Mei Shui Yan able to keep us under her control in this manner? The two women felt as if the emperor's controlling powers didn't match up to Mei Shui Yan's. What are the origins of this big sister Mei? How does she possess such a mannerisms? The two women bore these suspicions in their heart. However, their hands continued to write incessantly. In fact, they continued to work without a halt despite being mentally exhausted. However, Mei Shui Yan wasn't the only reason for this. The real reason was related to their sweetheart Jun Moxie. After all, this work was highly important for him. Therefore, they had to press on with the work no matter how tired they were. It must be mentioned that Mei Shui Yan was a lord to the millions and millions of Xian beasts in the Tian Fa forest. And Mei Shui Yan's naturally commanding mannerism was a result of that. She could be normal around the leaders of the three holy lands if she were to come face to face with them. In fact, she could even curse out them in case she felt the need to do so. She would neither submit to humiliation, nor would she bend down in front of them. She had been a long-standing leader to an entire race which looked down upon the entirety of humanity. So, how could the monarch of a small country match up to her? In fact, the difference was as huge as that between the heaven and the earth. It was lunchtime at last. Jun Moxie lowered his voice on the stage and relaxed. His throat had started to fume by now. He was exhausted, but his excitement level was still at its heights. No kidding. Anyone who'd make this much gold in one morning would surely end up being in a more excited state of mind than Jun Moxie was. In fact, most people would have likely gotten a heart stroke or a brain hemorrhage out of excitement. Only 12 rounds of the auction had happened thus far. The fourth round had ended at 800,000. And fifth round had reached 850,000. However, the sixth round had turned into a fierce one. Therefore, the sale price had suddenly shot up to touch upon the mark of 1,000,000. And the auction had continued further in the same way. In fact, the 12th round had reached 1.2 million. Consequently, Jun Moxie had managed to collect a massive sum of over 10 million for those 12 bottles of bone-tempering pills. Moreover, this was over 10 million in gold. The 7 brothers of the donghua family had once fallen for the young master's trick. And they had landed their family in a massive debt of 90 million silver as a result. However, this debt was so astonishing for the donghua family that they had nearly drowned in it. But it must be noted that this astonishing amount would only convert to 900,000 in gold. And this 900,000 in gold was sufficient to finance the military expenditures of Tianxiang Empire's army for 3 years, even though this army was ranked to be the number 1 in the continent. If 10 million has to be converted to modern-day Chinese yuans, 1 tael is equal to 50 grams. So, 1 gram equals to 300 modern-day Chinese yuans. Therefore, 1 tael would be 15,000 yuans. And 10 million would be around 150 billion by that count. What kind of an astronomical number is this? I can't be certain about the calculation. But I'm extremely excited by the idea of it. Zhang Qinghan and Donghua Xiao Yi put down their pens. They then gasped as they realized that their entire strength left their bodies through their pens. And they suddenly collapsed after that. They were still able to blink their eyes, but they felt as if the rest of their bodies had gone off high in the clouds. Jun Moxie had barely come upstairs to drink water. But he jumped in fright as soon as he saw them. He obviously got no time to drink water. Instead, he began to transfer his spiritual aura into them without any delay. His aura was very different from Mei Shui Yan's primal energy. It was far more pure and incisive. And its results were also far more remarkable in nature. Therefore, both the women quickly recovered their health and vitality. However, his kind-hearted action only gave the two women the energy to let out their grievances. This is too fast. We get no time to rest. We aren't physically tired right now. But our souls have gotten tired. The organizers used this time to arrange meals for these people. Every restaurant in the Tianxiang city had been declared as filled to capacity this morning. And that was because the Jun family had already booked these restaurants. This had obviously been done so that their guests could dine in those establishments. But all the expenses were booked to the aristocratic hall instead. Jun Moxie could be considered as an extremely rich man. However, these bills still couldn't be ignored. Jun Moxie's heavenly destroyers and soul devourers were tasked to guide the guests to the restaurants. And these guests were then served with the numerous exotic delicacies which had been arranged for them. It must be said that the restaurants and wine shops of Tianxiang City made a great fortune today. In fact, the later generations would hail this day as the most grand and extravagant day of the Tianxiang City. Jun Moxie had arranged a grand feast inside the aristocratic hall for the people of the three holy lands. After all, one couldn't have dared to be negligent in making efforts for these people of great status. And that's because these people were likely to act out in a violent manner if they had been treated like every other family out there. Besides, it could be reckoned that these people were probably looking to mess with his family. So, why would the young master wish to give them an excuse for the same? That is why the young master had made great efforts in order to make his arrangements seem much better and extravagant than the ones outside. He had ensured that nothing was inferior in any manner. Jun Moxie had arranged for snake soup for everybody. However, this had only prompted the furious Snake King to give him a ferocious kick in the ass. Young Master Jun had repeatedly tried to explain himself with a look of embarrassment. Hey! Those snakes were farmed by me. They're farmed. Young Master Jun, Snake King, Mei Shuiyan, Guan Qinghan, and Dugu Xiao Yi had taken their seats around the same table. However, Big Bear and Earthcracker weren't arranged to sit on the same table since their endless chatter would kill everyone else. Jun Moxie had somehow tried to drag them to a table nearby. However, Mei Shuiyan had given them a stern glance when they had resisted. Consequently, the two beast kings were left with no alternative but to take their seats with Hai Chenfeng and Song Shang instead. Meanwhile, young Master Tang was still panting and gasping while counting the gold. It was no secret that Tang Yuan was the most miserly person to walk the lands. He had gotten so tired while counting the money that he had already fainted twice from the toiling work. However, he had still carried on without a rest. His sweat had been flowing like a river. Yet, the fire within him didn't seem to be showing any signs of dying out. Even an average person would go numb at the sight of such a huge amount of money. However, Tang Yuan was busy filling his eyes and belly with money. He was extremely excited. Sun Xiao Mei had been extremely distressed by this. She had wanted him to stop and rest. However, Jun Moxie had given her a ferocious glance. You wanted him to lose weight? Right? I've come up with this method with great difficulty. Only this method is appropriate at this point. He needs to start reducing weight right now. The other methods can only be implemented once he gets a start with this method. After all, he's so fat that any other excursive will be useless on him at this point. But we don't have to worry about him losing weight if we use this method. Therefore, she resisted her urge to persuade him even though she loved him dearly. She did feel like urging Tang Yuan, but she knew that he wouldn't even hear her words. Therefore, She hid her concerns under a question. Aren't you tired, fatty? Tang Yuan was almost dizzy out of weariness at this point. But his eyes were still shimmering at the sight of the gold. So he wiped his sweat, but didn't even turn his neck to see who had asked the question as he replied. Tired? Tired? There's so much of money here. So, how can I be tired? Oh, this money can be used to take a concubine in the future. Even another wife. Haha, wow. A wife, concubine. Sun Xiaomei couldn't believe her ears. This guy is already planning about these things at this time. Sun Xiaomei angrily turned around and began to walk away. She only uttered one thing. You go to hell. You live with your money forever. You better get so tired that you die today itself. You will at least get to avoid my anger if you die right now. How can one be tired to death here? It would be such a happy thing to die like that. Tang Yuan rolled his eyes and involuntarily uttered this in reply. Then, he again lost himself in his task of counting the enormous amount of money. It must be said that this man was extremely happy and excited. The poor fatty was happily immersed in the money. His thoughts were being dominated by gold at this time. Consequently, he hadn't even realized that he had already brought a disaster upon himself, a massive disaster. After all, this fatty had offended his own fiancée in such a grave manner. However, this fatty was still unaware of his stupidity. And that was because his heart and mind were sunk deep in gold. There was nothing else inside his brain right now. In fact, he had literally reached the stage of altruism at this point. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 529. Using the tail of the white snake to entertain the women. Jun Moxie drank a pot of wine out of immense satisfaction. He was so pleased that he stuffed himself with lots of food. It continued in this manner until he felt that he had restored his vitality. Then, he started to eat the myriad of dishes which were brought up in a leisurely manner. However, he was also offering the dishes to the 4 beautiful women in a very diligent manner at the same time. Miss May, come and taste this one. This is indeed a good item. Your feminine aspects will get nourished, and your kidneys will be repaired after you eat this. It can even make you more attractive by nourishing your skin. You obviously don't need this too much. But how can a woman take offense in being more attractive? Qing Han. Come. Eat this one. This one can enrich your blood. Your face has been looking pale since the past few days. It makes me very sad. Xiao Yi. Try eating this. This one is delicious. You chew a little to test it. Isn't it very chewy? Haha. This is my secret recipe. The flavor is very different. Green Hunter. Don't just eat the vegetarian food. Try this snake stew. This is very delicious. It melts into the mouth the moment it enters. It's very rare and delicious. Jun Moxie. Just tell me if you want to die right away, and I will help you in fulfilling your desire. The Snake King flared her nose as her eyes filling with a baleful expression. This guy wants to make the Snake King eat snake meat. He has no shame. What? Don't tell me that you're still not happy. It's my mistake. Haha. Miss Green Hunter. These insignificant snakes are nothing in front of you. I will surely grab a Snake King to make a stew for you girls the next time. Jun Moxie continued to mock her. Mei Shuayan noticed that the Snake King was about to explode. Therefore, she snorted and looked at Jun Moxie as she said, "Shut up." Jun Moxie stopped speaking with a grunting sound. However, his head was left dizzied when he was told to shut up. I can't dare to offend this extremely violent person. They eventually finished eating. However, they still had much time on their hands. Therefore, Jun Moxie rolled his eyes and said, "I'm free for the time being. So, I will tell you a story. It's a very wonderful story." After that, Jun Moxie opened his big mouth and started narrating the story regardless of whether the four women approved or not. The story young Master Jun told turned out to be The Tale of the White Snake. However, Jun Moxie's version was obviously different from the traditional Tale of the White Snake. The two snakes, one white snake and one green snake, were Xian beasts in his version. Moreover, these snakes were beast kings who were at peak of a Xian beast's strength. Jun Moxie's voice continued to modulate up and down in a rhythmic manner as he narrated the Tale of the White Snake. It must be mentioned that his narration was very fascinating. He had initially decided to narrate this story in order to tease the Snake King. However, he himself also got absorbed into the story as time passed. Snake King's cheeks turned red when she heard that the White Lady had given birth to Su Xian's son. She then abruptly asked him, "That White Lady gave birth to a baby? Or an egg?" This one seemed to be a baby." Jun Moxie rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He then said, "However, this part isn't exactly verified and researched, to be honest. We would only be able to understand this concretely if a snake Xian beast king who is capable of transforming into a human form marries a man." The Snake King grabbed a teapot from the table and splashed its contents on his face. And everyone suddenly burst into laughter. "Don't interrupt. Continue the story. What happened next?" Mei Shuayan hastily urged. The Lord of the Tianfa forest had been so fascinated by this story that she had even intervened and urged him loudly. That monk named Fa Hai became a great scholar. And he eventually locked the White Lady inside the Lei Feng Tower. Jun Moxie hastily continued the story. He then said with a twist. He then wrote down the inscription therein, "This beast king won't be able to come out unless the West Lake's water dries out, and Lei Feng Tower collapses." However, the bottom of the West Lake was as deep as the seas. So, how much time would it take to dry up? Moreover, that Lei Feng Tower's structure had been casted in solid copper. It had been built thousands of years ago, and its foundation was very strong. Its casting was immortal in nature. So, how could it fall? Therefore, this so-called condition was merely a deception. Jun Moxie narrated the story till here. And everyone sighed in unison. The Snake King sympathized with the White Lady, and her eyes had turned somewhat red. Dugu Xiao Yi was in tears. She twitched as she said, "What could be done? She couldn't come out for a lifetime. The poor White Lady. Boo-hoo. This is so pitiful. I know what happened afterwards. So, listen to the following parts." Jun Moxie smiled mischievously. After all, he wanted to flaunt the climax of the story. However, the four women got so furious that they glared at him and grabbed his ears, one on the left and one on the right. Then, they firmly twisted his ears and said, "Are you telling us or not?" Even young Master Jun couldn't resist surrendering in the face of this classic torture technique. So, he continued with a bitter expression on his face. So, the White Lady's son braved many difficulties in order to save his mother. Then, that happened. And this happened. And that happened. At last, he rescued her and brought her out. Then, the family was reunited. Jun Moxie wiped a cold sweat. I wanted to tease the Snake King, but I myself got trapped instead. And I was even forced to tell such a long story. So, it had a happy ending. Love always finds a way. That evil Fahai was donghua. What was he doing in between the passionate love of the family? His meddling had separated the couple for so many years. Debauchee wiped her tears and said angrily, "That great scholar wasn't a good person." It was evident that Mei Shuayan and the other two women also shared this feeling since they too nodded in agreement. Some good people composed a song to account the bitter experiences of this couple. And that song was passed from person to person in the entire world. And White Lady and Su Xian's love eventually became an immortal legend in this manner. Jun Moxie faintly smiled as he finished the story within a rhythmic manner. What song? Can you sing the song? Guan Qinghan and Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly became interested. Even Mei Shuayan and Snake King looked at him with meaningful expression in their eyes. Hum. My throat isn't suitable for singing this song. I avoid singing. Anyway, it's only a song. Jun Moxie hadn't thought that this would happen. In fact, he was suddenly feeling a bit embarrassed. After all, he couldn't sing this song. It must be mentioned that this great assassin had never sung openly in both his lives. Therefore, he straightaway decided to refuse. This won't work. Hurry up and sing. You still want to keep your ears, the four women spoke up in unison. They also came closer in order to surround him from every direction as they said this. They then formed walls with their bodies and blocked anyone's eyes from reaching Jun Moxie within. Jun Moxie whined in his heart at first. Then, he raised a hand in surrender and said, "I want to sing, but I'm declaring that I'm not good at singing. I can hum a bit at best. Moreover, this song is very old and lengthy. In fact, I've forgotten most of it." "No. You will recall the entire song. Otherwise, we'll pinch your ears," the four of them again spoke up in unison. Jun Moxie had been rendered helpless. So, he was forced to surrender once again. He then closed his eyes and adjusted his mood. After that, he coughed a few times. Meanwhile, the four women held their breath. Then, Jun Moxie eventually started to hum the song in low voice. Waiting thousands of years to meet you. There's no place to be together. And hold hands without difficult. 10 years of sailing the same boat, 100 years of waiting to rest on the same pillow. Jun Moxie finally finished the difficult humming. It seemed as if he had missed a few sentences in the song. However, his cheek had turned thicker than the city wall. And he hadn't cared about his slip-ups. This song hadn't been the complete version. However, it was so melodious that was sad and beautiful at the same time. Moreover, its lyrics were very touching. Consequently, it had made the eyes of the four women blurry. It was a very beautiful song. Mei Shuayan had a dreamy expression on her face. She then said lightly, "It had a very beautiful mood to it." The four women nodded at the same time. They had heard the song right after the story. And they had started feeling connected to the story's characters as a result. In fact, they had felt a myriad of emotions at the same time: happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. It even seemed that they had born and died with the characters. They had been rendered speechless for a while. Then, the faint notes of a mouth organ started to echo in the silence. However, this music was sounding like wailings. It turned out that Guan Qing Han had taken out her jade mouth organ from her sleeves. And she had then started playing it to the tune of Jun Moxie's hum. The mouth organ seemed to be sobbing and lamenting. And it seemed as if everyone had entered the illusory world of the story. The notes from the mouth organ lingered in the vanity for a while. Then it slowly drifted away. And everyone eventually came back to their senses. It was a very beautiful song. I've never heard such a nice song. Dugu Xiaoyi patted her hands with a look of intoxication on her face. Then she suddenly asked in amazement, "Elder brother Mo Xia, I've never heard this story. And I have never heard this song either. So, where did you hear this story from?" This question drew everybody's eyes to Jun Moxie. Consequently, Jun Moxie found himself in a difficult position again. So, he coughed a few times and said, "This story. I also heard this story by accident. I've even forgotten who told me the story. It was a long time ago. I remembered this now because this is a very good story. We're finished eating. And the afternoon session of the auction is also about to begin. So, we must rush to prepare for it. Hey! You must have something else as well." Dugu Xiaoyi pouted as she said in an affirmative tone, "I will dig it out of you." The little girl's voice was filled with positivity. However, it still seemed like a threatening gesture. Jun Moxie was left to sweat. "I will have to make my own songs every day if this little girl caught a hold of me. I'm afraid that I will end up depleting an entire library of songs in 2 days at this rate." However, the savior arrived at the right moment. A clear knock was heard on the door from the outside. It was followed by Hai Chenfeng's voice. He said, "Third young master. The seniors from the 3 Holy Lands said that there was something they wanted to discuss with you. But I don't know." 3 Holy Lands. Jun Moxie and Mei Shuayan looked at each other. He then quickly replied, "I will go at once." Hai Chenfeng quietly responded outside. Then Mei Shuayan frowned and stood up. "Will you accompany me?" Jun Moxie looked at Mei Shuayan. "Yes. I will accompany you. You won't be able to understand these people very easily. Even a small misdemeanor on your part might offend them by accident. And that could easily turn into a bloodbath. And your strength is still too weak in front of them." Mei Shuayan smiled faintly. She then added with a little concern in her eyes, "I've crossed paths with them in the past. I don't think that they will recognize me. But I can help you if I'm present over there." Jun Moxie smiled faintly and said, "I think this is only about the pills. They perhaps wish to know about the man who refines these pills. Why else would such great people from the Holy Lands be willing to pay attention to a secular idler like me? There won't be much to this. That's a good thing in a way. However, even these 2 questions have become matters of great importance at this time. And I reckon that there might be massive bloodshed in case something goes wrong." Mei Shuayan frowned. She seemed deeply concerned as she said, "I hadn't expected that today's event would become such a big thing. Therefore, I am afraid that the consequences can also be far more serious. I hadn't expected this from the outset." Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 530. The Coercion of the 3 Holy Lands. Bloodshed always has its cause and effect. But greed is the original sin. Jun Moxie said calmly, "We won't fear anyone's provocation. I'm not saying this because I have you to keep watch. I wouldn't have feared even if I had only had myself to rely on. Mei Shuayan nodded when she heard this. Then, both of them walked out together. They came to the hall where the elusive land of immortals people were seated. But they saw that the people from illusory ocean of blood and the great golden city had already arrived and were waiting for them. Ning Qing of the elusive land of immortals had occupied the head seat. And the people of the illusory ocean of blood and the great golden city were seated to his left and right, respectively. But the head seat opposite to them had been set aside for Jun Moxie. However, the experts from the three holy lands didn't even get up when young Master Jun arrived. They didn't offer him the conventional greetings either. It was evident that the three holy lands had already come to a tacit understanding they wanted to put up an initial show of their strength in front of Jun Moxie. Mei Shuayan was usually a very self-restrained individual. However, she couldn't help but frown when she saw at the situation. In fact, she was somewhat indignant. But Jun Moxie was calm and composed on the contrary. He merely winked at her, and both of them took their seats without consulting anyone. Jun Moxie's B*TT had barely squatted on the chair when he raised his leg. He then crossed it over the other leg to sit cross-legged. The seniors have come down from their venerable adobes. It's an honor that they've arrived at the Tianxiang city. However, I wasn't able to welcome you properly until now. This is extremely rude of me. But I take this opportunity to thank everybody for coming here. No wonder. Haha. Everyone probably had their lunch. Was it sufficient? Jun Moxie cupped his hands and said the greetings. It must be said that his words were quite pleasant to hear. But his words still seemed perfunctory since he was sitting in the cross-legged position. There were 15 experts present, and not even one of them was satisfied by this behavior. However, they looked at Mei Shuayan's stunning and beautiful features, and they couldn't help but stare blankly at her. In fact, they were so amazed that they even forgot about their anger. You are too kind, young friend. And you don't need to be formal. Young friend, you were very thoughtful. You've arranged everything very nicely, and we are very satisfied. Ning Qing faintly smiled as he waved out with his hands in a modest manner. Ma Jiangming gave a strange, heroic laugh. He then spoke up in a gloomy and sorrowful voice. Young Master Jun, we wish to discuss something with you. This is an important matter. It relates to the future of the continent. However, I don't recognize the girl who's sitting beside young Master Jun. Who is she? Every expert present in the room was under the spell of Mei Shuayan's stunning beauty. In fact, everybody had been stunned by her dazzling beauty. Even an expert like Ning Qing couldn't resist her beauty. His eyes had also flashed an expression of appreciation. However, Ma Jiangming's expressions made it seem as if he hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. In fact, it seemed as if he was slightly disgusted at the sight of Mei Shuayan. This is my wife. He. Jun Moxie had been harboring dark intentions in his heart. In fact, he had been hoping that somebody would ask this question. This young master was no stranger to being cheap and taking unfair advantage of others. It could be said that this had become his second nature. He was used to behaving like this. Moreover, young Master Jun's habit of taking unfair advantage of others had nearly become his usual practice in due course. He laughed in a thought-provoking manner. He then explained in detail since he was afraid that the others might not understand clearly. This is my wife. She's my lady. She shares my pillow, he. Mei Shuayan's charming face turned so pale with anger that she nearly fainted. She gave him a fierce look. But she couldn't refute at this moment. So, she had no option but to let this stupid guy feel proud of himself for a while. However, one would have to wait and see if he would still feel complacent about this matter 15 minutes later. Oh, this girl is very graceful and charming. She looks like a painting. In fact, she looks as if a fairy has transformed into a human. Young Master Jun is very lucky. It's a perfect match made in heaven, hee hee. Ning Wuqing smiled and said. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming had already received a gracious favor from Jun Moxie. After all, he had given them one bone-tempering pill each, for free. And they knew that what they had eaten was worth at least 50 to 60,000 gold coins. This was a huge favor. So, both the men were feeling slightly embarrassed to make things difficult for Jun Moxie. Therefore, these two leading men were hoping to rely on their counterpart illusory ocean of blood. In fact, they were particularly relying on the illusory ocean of blood's young Lord Huyen Xiao. After all, the youngster generation was bound to be better at communicating with the younger generation. He wouldn't have to drop from his position of seniority in age while talking with a youngster like Jun Moxie. Unfortunately, they still weren't aware that an expert of the illusory ocean of blood had arbitrarily gotten them involved in a personal affair between three certain influential families and a family named the Huang family. Moreover, a conflict had erupted thereafter. And that's because the illusory ocean of blood had attempted to snatch the pills from the Jun family by showing off their strength. In fact, the illusory ocean of blood's best expert for this mission, Huang Taiyang, had already lost his life in the premises of the Jun family's residence. It could be said that these two sides were already irreconcilable. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming would have surely felt very depressed if they had known about this matter. And that's because the illusory ocean of blood was intended to represent the three holy lands in these negotiations with Jun Moxie. Therefore, their cause never had any chances of success to begin with. In fact, there would be no hope even if the illusory ocean of blood was to beseech Jun Moxie during these negotiations. Young Master Jun. I'm the young lord of the illusory ocean of blood Huyen Xiao. Huyen Xiao gloomily looked at Jun Moxie. His expressions were malicious like that of a viper as he stared young Master Jun. An incorporeal pressure surged from his body as he spoke. This pressure then charged towards Jun Moxie. Huyen Xiao's plan was very tyrannical, but effective. His Xian cultivation had already reached the third level of the spirit Xian realm. Therefore, he had planned that he would use his superior strength to suppress his opponent's desire to fight before the start of the battle. And Jun Moxie would obviously have to submit to Huyen Xiao's domination in these negotiations since he would have fallen into a disadvantageous position. And wouldn't the three holy lands be able to take anything they desire once that had happened? I've been looking forward to meeting you. I've genuinely been looking forward to meeting you. After all, to know a man by his reputation isn't as good as meeting him in person. And you're indeed better in person. The young Lord Huyen is genuinely an invincible expert. You're outstanding. This Jun Moxie admires you. I greatly admire you. Jun Mo politely greeted him. He was still seated in a cross-legged position. In fact, he was still as solid as a rock. Jun Moxie had even smiled when he had looked at Huyen Xiao. However, young Master Jun had looked him as if he was watching a clown perform a roadside show. Huyen Xiao's mountainous momentum had struck Jun Moxie like a tsunami. However, this dreadful momentum had suddenly subsided in the same manner a sea wave does when it runs into a reef. The strong and ferocious momentum hit Jun Moxie on his face, but he didn't even feel it. On the contrary, Huyen Xiao suddenly felt as if he had landed a powerful punch on a cotton bag. He couldn't help but feel slightly uncomfortable in the pit of his stomach as a result. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming frowned. Their pupils also contracted. After all, this was sufficient to prove that those worldly rumors weren't entirely baseless. The Jun family had an extremely powerful and unrivaled expert behind them. They were far stronger than Huyan Xiao. However, they introspected and realized even they wouldn't have been able to deal with that pressure from Huyan Xiao so easily. Moreover, they certainly wouldn't have been able to remain so calm and collected. Everyone had noticed that the fairy-like girl had slightly raised her eyelids. And Huyan Zhao's pressure had turned into nothing as a result. They knew that Jun Moxie could have withstood it as well. But he wouldn't have done it with so much ease. It turned out that Mei Shuayan hadn't been able to bear the sight of how arrogantly these people from the three holy lands were acting. You want to show me your power? So, I will show you my power as well. Let's see who is more powerful. The other dozen or more experts from the three holy lands remained upright in their seats. They made no attempts to flaunt their strengths. However, they knew the gravity of Huyan Zhao's pressure. Even an expert of the spirit Xian realm would have felt uncomfortable if they had been sitting there. However, Jun Moxie had remained unaffected. Consequently, everyone had been left stunned. Jun Moxie might be exceptional, but he's still less than 20 years in age. Wouldn't it have taken a great and all-knowing master to have trained such a disciplined disciple? Well, you are too kind and humble. Young Master Jun is a very promising talent. Your Xian strength is amazing. Moreover, the Jun family's defense is impenetrable. In fact, it's truly admirable. Huyan Xiao spoke up in a dark tone. Young lord, you are flattering us. The Jun family is merely a worldly family. How can we scale the heights of the world like the three holy lands have? We can only cope with some dog-like insignificant thieves. However, if some powerful expert would have come to rob us, then, he, Jun Moxie replied modestly. His expressions also seemed very sincere. Huyan Zhao's face turned red, and he instantly got angry. Jun Moxie's words could have been considered as modest. But how could Huyan Xiao not have understood the meaning implied? Dog-like insignificant thieves. Isn't he talking about Senior Huang Taiyang? But that was a man from my illusory ocean of blood. This young lord must admit that he can't match young Master Jun when it comes to the art of words. However, the matter in front of us is related to the safety of the mainland's future. It also involves the survival and welfare of common people who live therein. Therefore, we've come here with a hope that young Master Jun can give some answers. Huyan Zhao's dark eyes flashed with anger and he said slowly. Jun Moxie was rendered speechless for a while. How on earth can these people from the so-called Holy Lands conduct themselves like this? They opened their mouth with talks about the continent's future, and they shut it with a mention of the common people's welfare. Do you genuinely believe that you represent them? Besides, this Huyan Xiao doesn't understand anything. Even an ordinary Sky Xian expert can slow down their aging because of their Xian strength. Therefore, such a person seems 30-40 years old even though they are 60 or 70. But that doesn't make them a young lord. The contact that had happened a moment ago had enabled Jun Moxie to determine that this young lord had spirit Xian level cultivation, and his age was around 50 years. It could be said that he had entered the spirit Xian realm very quickly. However, his real age and appearance seemed very complementary. In fact, it seemed very appropriate. I only see a semi-old man. But this semi-old fellow still claims himself as young lord. This makes me sick. Terms of address such as young master, young lady, young lord, and so on have some limits. Everyone knows that a young master's age should be around 17-18 years. Even a 20 or 30-year-old individual can qualify for this. However, anyone should feel embarrassed to call themselves a young lord if they're over 40 years. Has anyone ever seen an old guy calling himself a young master? Jun Moxie genuinely wanted to say, "You are old. So, stop this young lord nonsense." Young lord, can you be a bit more direct with your words? This Jun is a little slow. Therefore, I can't understand what the relation I have with the future of the common people of entire continent. However, I do find it as a great compliment nonetheless. Jun Moxie had intentionally aggravated the pronunciation of this young lord part. Consequently, the gap between the two words had been made very evident. The experts of the elusive land of immortals and the great golden city were left giggling through their teeth as a result. Huyen Xiao turned red. He then angrily said, "This young lord wants to ask you about how many bone-tempering pills you have. And where is that man who has refined these pills? He's an important man in this matter. But you're an insignificant individual, Jun Moxie. So, you're obviously regarded as a nobody." He had been provoked by Jun Moxie's words. Therefore, he hadn't been able to prevent himself from blurting out. However, he had also ended up claiming himself as young lord in the same manner as Jun Moxie had. This was obviously followed by a louder burst of jeering. The experts from the illusory ocean of blood had been able to restrain themselves. But how could the experts from the two other holy lands have withstood the impact of this aftershock? Huyen Xiao flushed with anger in the face of such an embarrassing situation. In fact, he had been pushed to the verge of losing his wits. Even the momentous start to his words had lost their power by the end of his speech. Ning Wuqing and Ma Jiangming suddenly thought, "This is bad." Rumors say that this third young master Jun is a fearless man who acts without any regard for the consequences. Huyen Zhao's question might result in a stalemate here. This story will be continued to chapter 531. For those of you who are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. The interesting and best stories will be updated. See you again in the next episode.